Chapter 259. Chapter 259. Unbroken Sword Intent. Thankfully, Feng Yan's saber was merely a mortal item. Otherwise, even if it was merely a level 1 spiritual tool, there would be no need for the engraving of any kind of martial intent, as the degree of sharpness alone would be enough to break Ling Han's sword in half. Great Sun Mad Saber, break into pieces and exterminate! Feng Yan gave a loud shout, advancing with saber in hand. The saber flashed, creating ripples of power. The power behind these ripples was extremely terrifying. What a powerful saber intent! Xiet Chong exclaimed in astonishment. By now, the decree of the spiritual infant tier elite had already been withdrawn, so everyone had naturally gotten back onto their feet and all turned to watch this battle between two young geniuses. However, there were some who had turned to look at Hu Niu and Yen Tian Zhao. This was because these two had actually managed to resist the might of a spiritual infant tier elite that had spread out from the decree, which was something that was both shocking and unanticipated. Xiet Chong was named as Overlord Saber, which clearly showed that his ability in the field of saber arts was definitely in the upper ranks in Rain Country. And even he would exclaim in astonishment, showing that Feng Yan's saber technique was indeed extraordinary. And quite a lot nodded their heads in agreement. Whether they liked Feng Yan was a different matter, but if they were merely looking at his merits, Feng Yan's ability in saber arts was indeed extraordinary. Otherwise, he would not have easily defeated the third imperial prince, Zhao Huan and Kenyi. Ling Han was also slightly surprised. The might behind this saber technique had reached the level of a black grade high level martial arts technique. The Feng clan was, of course, unable to possess a black grade martial arts technique. In the whole Rain Country, only the imperial family possessed a black grade high level martial arts technique, and it was naturally impossible for Feng Yan to obtain such a secret technique from the imperial family. Thus, he must have been taught when he had gone to the Winter Moon sect. Not bad, not bad. No wonder he had obtained the favor of an elite of spiritual infant tier. Feng Yan should only have practiced this saber art for more than a month, yet he was already quite well practiced with this saber technique. He had at least grasped about 20 to 30% of the true essence of this technique, which showed how uncommon his talent in martial arts was. However, it was only uncommon. With a whistle, Ling Han waved his sword, and the Four Seasons sword technique circulated, heading towards Feng Yan. This sword technique was something he had taught to Liu Yutong. It was also a martial arts technique he had used in his last life. There was no need for him to familiarize himself with it at all. With a thought, he naturally could circulate it smoothly and create a hazy drizzle as if it was a spring shower. These little droplets of rain were formed from Ling Han's origin power. As long as they were attached to one's body, the origin power would enter inside and create a very terrifying level of destruction. What a great sword technique! When they saw Ling Han's sword technique, quite a number of people exclaimed in praise. In the field of martial arts, the saber and the sword were the two most commonly used weapons. Feng Yan's saber technique had drawn exclamations of shock from the saber wielders, whereas Ling Han's sword technique had obtained the praise from the swordsmen. This young man's sword intent is definitely not weaker than Feng Yan's. That's right. Honestly, if I suppress my cultivation level to the level of the Gushing Spring tier, even I may not be able to use such a powerful sword technique. That's odd. Why do I feel as if this strike is not fully expressed, and there is some reservation? You have that feeling too. With a long whistle, Feng Yan had advanced with a saber in hand. Ting! A crisp sound was heard, creating a sound wave that spread out in all directions. Those martial artists below the Gushing Spring tier began to bleed from their ears, noses, and eyes and looked very terrible. There was also a large number of people who were in the Gushing Spring tier that could not help but cover their ears. Ling Han and Feng Yan were both forced back, and this exchange of blows gave them both an equal share of the limelight. It was difficult to decide who was stronger. "I have underestimated you a bit." Feng Yan humphed icily. With a wave of his long saber, he created a bitingly cold light that raged like a waterfall. The saber rolls 30,000 feet and slashes all enemies on this world. Xie Chang's hand trembled, and he could not help but touch the hilt of his own saber, fighting spirit flickering in his eyes. Such a saber intent really gave him an itch, making him have the urge to battle such a powerful saber intent. That strike just now was actually not his full power. Gods, he's already so powerful, and he can actually still increase his power. He's really too terrifying. This time, Ling Han would only be able to retreat in the face of his superior strength. In the midst of the exclamations of surprise from their audience, Ling Han waved his sword and once more the spring rain appeared. However, it was only for an instant before the sword intent changed abruptly. From the gentle spring rain, it transformed into the shocking thunder of summer. Hong long long, the sound of thunder was endless, almost deafening their ears. What? Everyone was flabbergasted. A series of sword techniques. How could this be? The first strike has not been fully displayed, yet he was able to make another strike? Additionally, the switching of his sword intent is so natural that it gives one the feeling of spring moving into summer, which abides by the rules of nature. No wonder I felt that the strike just now was not fully expressed. So it seems as if the sword intent is unbroken and has not been fully expended at all. This is really too scary. How did this guy cultivate such a technique? But was that the end of it? Ling Han's sword intent once again changed. An autumn breeze began to blow. It was a bit chilly and filled with killing intent. It changed once again and became the biting cold of winter. Endless white snow flew all around, and they could not help but hug themselves, feeling cold. One sword technique has 4 sword intents. Gods, what a monster! This is too much of a monster. How is this possible? Everyone was dumbfounded. This had completely exceeded their level of understanding. Such a sword technique should not have appeared on this mortal plane at all. Ling Han smiled calmly. When he combined the 4 seasons sword technique into one, its might was close to the level of an earth-grade martial arts technique. If it was not for the fact that he had a sliver of the divine sense of a heaven-tier elite, he would not have been able to so smoothly use such a sword technique. And once there was a lapse, there would be a break in the 4 seasons, and the power behind the combined sword technique would be even lower than simply using one single sword technique. Spring rain, summer thunder, autumn wind, and winter snow. Ling Han controlled these 4 sword intents and boldly advanced towards Feng Yan in attack. Feng Yan's expression could not help but change drastically. If Ling Han had only used a single season sword technique, he would be completely unafraid and could even use the forcefulness of his saber to suppress Ling Han. But now that the 4 seasons sword technique was combined into one, it produced the effect of 1 + 1 was larger than 2. This was a sword array. It was equivalent to having 4 martial artists join forces against him. No matter how powerful he was, how could he be able to stand against 4 Ling Han at the same time? He roared furiously, and his saber lowered and stabbed into the ground. His right foot suddenly stamped onto the ground, and he forced his body to fly back in retreat. Hung! The images of the sword surged, yet they missed their target. Only the tables and chairs nearby were carved into pieces that flew into the air. Hoo! Feng Yan kept panting harshly. Just now he had forcibly withdrawn his attack, which was equivalent to attacking himself. Thus he was now feeling horrible. He hurriedly swallowed a medicinal pill, his eyes fixated on Ling Han and a powerful dread flashing in them. He could tell that one strike from Ling Han contained 4 sword techniques and 4 different sword intents. If it was only one, he was not afraid, but when the 4 seasons joined forces, The might was too powerful. Even he did not dare to face such an attack head-on. Damn! Damn! At first, he could easily crush Ling Han with a single lift of his hand. However, he had not yet obtained the approval of the Winter Moon sect at the time. So he had been cautious and planned to kill Ling Han 3 months later instead of doing so immediately. He had never thought that his mistake would have caused his younger brother to die by Ling Han's hand, and the latter had furthermore even obtained the ability to stand against him as an equal. This brat had really developed too fast, hadn't he? Get rid of him. He definitely had to get rid of him. Feng Yan once again drew out the decree and unrolled it. The powerful suppression was again released, and pa, everyone was compelled to kneel or sit on the ground, all forced into a lower position. Die. Feng Yan used the decree like it was a whip, and whipped it towards Ling Han. There were characters flashing on its surface, and it was for some reason eerie. Chapter 260. Chapter 260. Compel. Ling Han did not fear the dominating might of a spiritual infant-tier elite, but if he was struck by the martial intent of one, that would be like an egg being smashed onto a rock. His only fate would be being shattered into pieces. Thus, when the decree flew towards him, he could only choose to retreat. Run, run. Let's see where you can run to. Feng Yan smirked frostily and chased after him, waving the decree like a whip. When he whipped the decree, the might of a spiritual infant tier became more and more terrifying. Even those elites in the spiritual pedestal tier were sweating bullets, and the others, needless to say, were all paralyzed like pools of sludge. Ling Han's figure raced rapidly as he simultaneously thought of a plan. If he drew out the demon birth sword, even if he wasn't able to activate the martial intent within it, merely the material used to forge a level 10 spiritual tool would be enough to defend against the martial intent of a spiritual infant tier elite. However, the problem was, if he actually revealed it in public, how much attention would he attract? If he was merely a single person, then it was fine. If worst came to worst, he could always choose to flee and relocate to a different place. However, his roots were now in Rain Country, into Yuan City in Gray Cloud Town. He could leave, but what about Ling Dongxing and his other relatives? The Ling clan had already experienced one catastrophe, so how could Ling Han bear to draw another deadly disaster onto the Ling clan, especially when it was because of him? No, he definitely could not use the demon birth sword. Ha 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 ha, in front of the decree of a spiritual infant tier elite. How long do you intend to keep running? Feng Yan laughed loudly. His master had given him this decree, so he could be unafraid even in front of the Rain Emperor himself. What more when this was merely a martial artist of the gushing spring tier he was facing now? Surrender yourself to death obediently, and don't think that you will be able to escape. Ling Han used shadow wind motion. This, too, was a black-grade high-level martial arts technique. Since he had already broken through to the gushing spring tier, the yellow-grade martial arts techniques he had used previously could, of course, be discarded, and they were all exchanged for the higher-level black-grade martial arts techniques. Feng Yan could not catch up. He was taught a black-grade high-level saber technique, and he had not fully learned it in over a month's time. So where would he have the time to learn other martial arts techniques? Ling Han was different. He had used all these techniques in his last life. But even if he hadn't, with the comprehension ability of someone who used to be in the heaven tier, how could learning them be difficult for him? Don't run. Feng Yan was in a towering rage, but he could do nothing against Ling Han. The latter was as nimble as an eel and unbelievably slippery, so he couldn't hit him at all. Ling Han merely smiled calmly and said, "Once the decree is unrolled, the martial intent within would begin to disperse. You using it in such a way is only hastening the rate of its dispersal. So how much longer would it last?" When one was talking about the understanding of the secrets of martial arts, who would understand more than he who had once been in the heaven tier? How did you know? Feng Yan was indeed greatly shocked. His master had told him so before. A decree was not a spiritual tool and was only slightly more durable than a spiritual talisman, but it was still very limited in use. You don't have to bother yourself with that. Ling Han's sword waved and shot out a few flashes of sword qi. It was not his style to merely defend without attacking. Feng Yan did not use his saber. With a wave of the decree, the martial intent contained within was enough to shatter the sword qi. However, he became more and more irritable. If things went on this way, he would really expend all the martial intent contained in the decree until it was merely a piece of scrap paper. In the first place, he was a haughty person, and instantly a violent light shone in his eyes. He turned back and the decree smacked onto a man's head. The martial intent spread out, and that man's head instantly exploded. Unfortunately, that man was under the suppression of the might of a spiritual infant-tier elite, and so could only shiver as he lay on the ground. There was no way for him to dodge at all, so he could merely watch as misfortune fell on his head. Feng Yan! Everyone roared in fury. What was this guy planning to do? Ling Han, if you dare to dodge again, I will kill all the people here. Feng Yan declared coldly, his killing intent boiling. When these words were heard, everyone was both shocked and furious. Those who had arrived to attend the wedding today were all people in the upper social circles of the imperial city, and some were even elites of the spiritual pedestal tier. Yet Feng Yan actually dared to use their lives to threaten Ling Han. This was practically crazy. Feng Yan, you've gone too far. Many began to roar in fury. This is between you and Ling Han. What do we have to do with it? Don't make us look down on you. Feng Yan merely pretended as if he had not heard anything, and said coldly, You're all just a group of trash. So what if I kill all of you? Who would dare do anything against me? If I use all my effort, it is not that I am unable to kill Ling Han, but that would force me to reveal my trump card, and that is not something I want to happen, since I can use a faster way to kill him. What need is there for me to expend the extra effort? Everyone was even more furious, and all began to curse and shout. However, there was one thing that Feng Yan was right about. He could do as he liked, kill anyone he liked, but they would not dare to do anything to him because Feng Yan was a disciple of the Winter Moon sect. Who dared to make a move against a disciple of the Winter Moon sect? The most they could do would be to expel him from Rain Country. Ling Han, aren't you going to obediently surrender to your death? Or do you want so many people to die with you? Feng Yan laughed loudly, looking very arrogant. It was as if he was a cat that was toying with a mouse. With a wave of the decree, another dozen people was smacked into pieces. This guy indeed had a trump card. For example, he had not used the mirror light body. As a result, Ling Han was even more sure that this kind of special constitution had to be activated consciously. A special constitution that had to be consciously activated would expend energy, origin power, or spiritual energy, and there was a limit to all of these. It was impossible to keep it going at all times. On the other hand, Ling Han's body of rock cliff was a passive skill. He did not need to activate it for it to be effective. However, even if he actively circulated it, he would not be able to increase the firmness of his physical body. Additionally, Ling Han believed that Feng Yan must have had some kind of secret. Otherwise, he would not have battled the eldest imperial prince to a draw, and would not have been picked to become the disciple of a spiritual infant tier elite. Don't make me look lightly on you. Ling Han said. He would, of course, not wait quietly to be killed. Look lightly. Feng Yan laughed loudly and said haughtily, What right do you have to look lightly on me? Do you know that I should keep this secret for the moment? You want to die in vigorous battle? Impossible. I want you to die in a stupid and cowardly way. His thoughts turned, and he said, Everyone, I can spare you, but you have to do something for me, and that is to apprehend Ling Han. I will give you the time of 3 breaths, and if by that time Ling Han is still not kneeling before me. Then I can only use this decree and kill all of you. So evil. Do not doubt my determination. Don't you all forget who I am, he said frostily. Their hearts trembled. Feng Yan was not an ordinary disciple of the Winter Moon sect, but the personal disciple of a grand elder. Previously, he dared to publicly oppose the eldest imperial prince, and now even dared to brazenly commit murder without any kind of reservations at all. Feng Yan could do as he liked, but who could really do anything against him? With such thoughts, Feng Yan's threat was like a knife held at their necks, making them tremble with uncontrollable fear. Ling Han did not speak. He was merely trying to find an opening. I have given you all a chance, and if you want to live, you have to take hold of it firmly, Feng Yan said with a smile as he withdrew the decree and toyed with everyone as if they were all in the palm of his hand. He was extremely pleased with this feeling of being superior to everyone else. It was at this moment that Ling Han shot out like an arrow and instantly appeared in front of Feng Yan. Taking advantage of the opening created when Feng Yan withdrew the decree, he moved as quick as lightning, and his sword smacked onto Feng Yan's wrist. Pa! The decree instantly flew out of his grasp. Chapter 261. Chapter 261. Battle of Backgrounds. Shwa! The decree streaked through the air, and there was a golden light bubbling forth. Both Ling Han and Feng Yan leaped through the air, chasing after the decree. Whoever was able to gain possession of the decree now would practically be getting hold of the life and death power in this situation. Pung, 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 pung. The two men entered into an endless exchange of moves in midair, but Ling Han was still at a slight advantage and managed to get the upper hand. Ling Han stretched out a hand, and just when his fingertips were about to touch the decree, he suddenly paused. Then he waved out his left hand, and the blood-sucking origin gold transformed into a golden thread that circled around the decree. Another toss, and he had cast off the decree far away from him. The decree floated calmly downwards. A man who had been standing at the side grew covetous and snatched it over in a single move, who knew that just as his hand had just grabbed hold of it, his whole arm was reduced to a lump of bloody flesh with a paw, instantly causing the man to shriek in agony. Hum! Feng Yan stopped moving and said coldly, "You are quite cautious." Previously, he had indeed been caught off guard by Ling Han, but in the exchange of blows and fighting over to grab the decree that followed afterwards, it was not that he had been losing, but rather that he had held back some of his ability deliberately. He wanted to let Ling Han take hold of the decree and use that opportunity to crush Ling Han's arm. He had not thought that Ling Han would be so cautious, however. It was not that Ling Han was especially cautious. Instead, as someone who used to be an ultimate elite of the heaven tier, how could he be unaware of the taboos of a decree? He pretended that he was ignorant, made use of Feng Yan's own intent to harm others, and led the latter to actually discard the decree on his own. Now that Feng Yan had lost the decree as a threat, the others would naturally not have to obey his commands. In a one-against-one battle, Ling Han was unafraid. Feng Yan. Everyone was fuming in rage. A lowly martial artist from a humble background actually dared to threaten their lives. This was enough to make them all want nothing more but to devour him alive. "Don't be defiant!" Feng Yan exclaimed arrogantly, his eyes sweeping over his surroundings. "You pieces of trash only know how to express your anger verbally, but do any of you actually dare to make a move against me?" "You!" Quite a number of people roared loudly with reddened eyes. The relatives of those people Feng Yan had killed previously were especially furious, their bodies trembling with restrained anger. However, the Winter Moon sect was like a colossal behemoth that was pressing down on their heads. Who would dare make a move against Feng Yan when they were perfectly aware that he was a disciple of the Winter Moon sect? "Don't go, you pieces of trash!" Feng Yan smirked icily and no longer bothered with the rest. He turned to Ling Han and said, Though I am definitely going to kill you, but I have to admit that you are at least much braver than these pieces of trash, since you actually dare to stand against me." Ling Han's sword tremored, and he said, "You are speaking too much nonsense. You had best wash your neck clean and prepare for death. You really dare to kill me?" Feng Yan laughed. "Are you not afraid of the Winter Moon sect?" "So what about it?" Ling Han asked calmly. He was indeed not taking the Winter Moon sect to heart. No matter how much Feng Yan scrambled his brains, he could not possibly know that Ling Han used to be an ultimate elite of the heaven tier, though his cultivation level had dropped. But how could his pride and scope drop as well? In the future, he would definitely be capable of once again returning to the heaven tier, and this would not take too much time. What more when there was still an Ao Feng in the Winter Moon sect, someone that Ling Han was definitely going to eliminate in the future. He was destined to face the Winter Moon sect in an open confrontation. In comparison, Feng Yan could only be considered a minor character. Ha 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 ha, what courage! Only killing such a man would be fulfilling. Feng Yan laughed loudly, pointed at Ling Han, and said, "If it was not for the fact that you killed my younger brother, I really would not have wanted to kill you off so soon." "Dream on." Ling Han attacked, his sword waving. Instantly, 6 flashes of sword chi danced together. "Do you think I'm afraid of you?" Feng Yan shouted, and a faint silvery light flickered from his body. He waved his long saber in a slash that possessed the aggressive air of advancing forwards without any sign of retreat. "What a good saber!" Xie Chong could not help but call out, "You're still praising this brat?" Lu Zhongtian rolled his eyes. This guy had almost killed them all off just moments ago. "That's quite another matter. This brat's saber arts is indeed not bad. If it wasn't for AI, even I have a bit of desire of take him as my disciple." Xie Chong sighed with a shake of his head, looking like he felt it was really quite a pity. Ting, 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 ting. Ling Han and Feng Yan endlessly exchanged blows, and saber chi and sword chi danced vigorously through the air. At this point, Feng Yan had activated the mirror light body and was able to rebound about 20% of Ling Han's attacks. This was extremely astonishing, as not only was he able to reduce 20% of Ling Han's attack power, he was also able to reflect this attack power back onto Ling Han and strengthen his own attacks in the process. In the process of receiving attacks, Feng Yan's body was also flickering with silvery light, like it was a mirror that was about to shatter. Obviously, there was a limit to the attack power he could reflect. As long as this limit was exceeded, then he would not be able to reflect the attack and would be directly shattered instead. Ling Han's body of rock cliff also displayed its effects. He could more or less withstand the 20% of attack power that was reflected back onto him and only feel the slightest bit of discomfort. However, he only needed to circulate the indestructible heaven scroll, and this uncomfortable feeling would disappear without a trace. The two fighters' right hands wielded their respective weapons, while their left hands continued a barrage of punches and palm strikes. Even their legs would occasionally kick out at their opponent, creating one after another powerful attacks, with an astonishing might behind each attack. Those people around them were dumbfounded by this display. Who in the younger generation would still be capable of standing against these two? Too powerful. Feng Yan was a bit hesitant. This was not his full power. But if he wanted to kill Ling Han, then he would have to reveal some of his more powerful trump cards. Was it worth exposing his trump cards just for one Ling Han? Moreover, Ling Han should also have trump cards that he had not revealed yet. At least, he had not used that sword technique that contained a series of 4 sword intents. So Feng Yan could not help but keep a few cards up his sleeve as security. "I'm not late, am I?" At this moment, a hearty laughter was heard, and a tall old man strode over. With every step, it seemed as if there was a dazzling light under his feet, and a purple-colored light actually bloomed under his steps, like the blooming of a flower. This was martial intent, something that could only be produced by someone who was at least in the spiritual ocean tier. This man had already reached the spiritual pedestal tier. Who was he speaking to? Feng Yen laughed heartily and said, "Attendant Xiao, you're just in time." "Hee, allow me to introduce myself. I am Qiu Ku, a little attendant of the Winter Moon sect," the old man said, all smiles, presenting an amiable attitude. Yet everyone's hearts almost stopped at that. An attendant of the Winter Moon sect. If Feng Yen could only be considered a mere disciple, then Qiu Ku could to a great extent represent the will of the Winter Moon sect. "Attendant Qiu, help me apprehend this brat." Feng Yen said, "All right." Qiu Ku nodded his head without hesitation. He did not put on any airs, even though Feng Yen was much weaker than him in terms of cultivation level. This was naturally because he was giving face to that powerful elite of the spiritual infant tier standing behind Feng Yen. "You dare!" Fu Yuansheng instantly stepped out. Qiu Ku's eyes swept over and slightly narrowed as he said, "A black-grade high-level alchemist." "Just let the young people deal with their own matters, where we, the older people, just stand by at one side," Fu Yuansheng said, calmly, yet there was a forcefulness to his tone that would accept no rejection. As a member of the Alchemist Association, he was not afraid of the Winter Moon sect. Qiu Ku looked hesitant. Firstly, he had no desire to offend a high-level alchemist, and secondly, Fu Yuansheng was also in the spiritual pedestal tier, so even if he made a move, it was not certain that he would be able to kill Ling Han. Feng Yen smirked coldly and said, "Clan head Lu, this man has killed a son-in-law of the Lu clan. Could it be that the Lu clan wants to simply watch as he goes unpunished? I will not make things difficult for you either. As long as you help detain Master Fu, the benefits that I have promised to the Lu clan would not be reduced in any way." Chapter 262. Chapter 262. Domineering Rain Emperor. There were some who were aware that the reason the Lu clan had agreed to have Lu Yutong marry Feng Ming must have been because Feng Yen had promised them some kind of benefits. But how could such a deal that had been agreed upon so privately be announced right in front of so many people? Clan head Lu's face unconsciously darkened, but Feng Yen was completely unrestrained. Moreover, he had a terrifying background behind him. So what could he do even if he was very displeased? How could he really hang Feng Yen up and give him a thrashing? When he remembered the benefits that the Lu clan would be able to gain, clan head Lu merely hesitated for a while and then stood up, then said to Fu Yuansheng, "Grandmaster Fu, give me some face and please do not interfere, all right?" Fu Yuansheng's expression changed drastically. He asked, "If I make a move, are you intending to stop me?" "That's right," clan head Lu forced out through gritted teeth. "Lu Fei Peng, I am not very displeased, and in the future, perhaps the Heaven's Medicine Pavilion will not be selling one single medicinal pill to the Lu clan. Are you sure that you want to continue to anger me?" Fu Yuansheng said threateningly. Clan head Lu's hands trembled slightly, obviously embroiled in an inner struggle. However, he immediately replied, "Grandmaster Fu, please do not interfere." He was determined to side with Feng Yen. Fu Yuansheng was furious. He really did not know what kind of benefits Feng Yen had promised to the Lu clan that not only made them agree to deliver a genius member of their clan and even ruin their relations with the Heaven's Medicine Pavilion. One had to understand that even though the Lu clan has developed their own alchemists, it was impossible that they would be able to supply enough alchemical pills to everyone. Thus, they would still have to visit the Heaven's Medicine Pavilion to replenish their supplies of alchemical pills. He humphed and said, "Then let me come and experience your battle prowess." Yet clan head Lu did not attack. As long as Fu Yuansheng did not move, he was definitely not going to attack. After all, the former was also in the spiritual pedestal tier, and if they really came to blows, they would be creating too much destruction, and this was still the Lu residence. "Attendant Xiao, there is no one capable of stopping you now," Feng Yan declared with a smile, his expression extremely arrogant and wild. Qiu Ku laughed loudly and strode towards Ling Han. There were in total 4 elites of the spiritual pedestal tier here at the moment, and 2 of them were obviously on Feng Yan's side. Only one was supporting Ling Han, while the remaining one, Jia Boyin, seemed to have become a blind and deaf person and continued to sit without making any movement, looking completely at ease. Obviously, the Spirit Treasures Pavilion was willing to cheer Ling Han on, but was definitely not going to offend the Winter Moon sect for his sake. What was Ling Han going to do? Zhu Wujiu, the 7th Imperial Prince, and the others were all frowning, whereas the eldest and the 3rd Imperial Prince smirked coldly, who asked Ling Han to ignore their advice and insist on causing his own destruction, like an egg striking a rock. He deserved whatever he got. Ling Han sighed. Now that things had turned out this way, he could only choose to reveal his status as a black grade high-level alchemist. You actually dare to be insolent in my territory. It was at this moment that a voice filled with ultimate might was heard, causing the hearts of all the people gathered here to tremble. They all felt a reverence and fear that seemed to originate from the depths of their souls. Your Imperial Majesty. Clan head Lu exclaimed in shock. This voice was precisely the voice of the current Emperor of Rain Country. Rain Emperor. Qiu Ku could not help but tense up. Though the Rain Emperor was in the spiritual pedestal tier as well, he was also the ruler of a nation. In terms of imposing manner, he was able to suppress all others in the spiritual pedestal tier. Not even he dared to underestimate the Rain Emperor. This is my Rain Country, and not the Winter Moon sect. The Rain Emperor's voice was once again heard, loud and mighty as thunder. I can turn a blind eye to the enmity of the younger generation, but if the older generation intends to interfere, I will kill anyone I see doing that. So domineering. Qiu Ku was a spiritual pedestal tier elite of the Winter Moon sect, yet the Rain Emperor would still rebuke him in such a way. I will kill anyone I see doing that. How could the words of a ruler be mere words? The young people in the area were all incredibly excited. This was the Rain Emperor, and he was indeed a powerful ruler. Even faced with a powerful elite of the Winter Moon sect, he did not cower in the slightest. This made them all feel as if their blood was boiling in their veins, making them feel the urge to have a grand battle. Meanwhile, the expressions of the eldest and the 3rd Imperial Prince were undergoing a massive change. They had not thought that the Rain Emperor himself would actually support Ling Han, and when they thought of their own positions, that was completely opposed to the Rain Emperor's stand. How were they going to inherit the throne this way? Only the 7th Imperial Prince was wearing an excited grin. He had gambled on the right choice. The Rain Emperor was a proud man, so how could he allow an outsider to undermine his authority on his own territory? Rain Emperor, your boasts are a bit too exaggerated. If an ultimate elite of the flower blossoming tier came from my sect, would you still dare to say such a thing? Qiu Ku asked coldly. The Winter Moon sect was naturally more powerful than Rain Country, and he himself was at the same cultivation level as the Rain Emperor, so how could he be afraid of the latter? In the time of 3 breaths, get lost immediately. Otherwise, I will smack you right out of my country. The voice of the Rain Emperor was once again heard. His voice was cold and forceful. Haha, then I would really like to experience that. Qiu Ku looked towards Ling Han, his killing intent flaring. They were both in the spiritual pedestal tier. Moreover, he was also an attendant of the Winter Moon sect. So how could he be scared off simply by the Rain Emperor's words? He was still a little anxious because he had not yet figured out where the Rain Emperor was at this moment. The voice rumbled as if it was coming from all directions, so he had no way to identify where it really came from. 1 breath. Everyone was counting down in their hearts. whereas Chioku began to walk towards Ling Han. 2 breaths. Chioku was not walking particularly quickly. He had completely pushed his alertness and awareness to their limits. He had long heard that the Rain Emperor was a genius of martial arts and possessed a terrifying battle prowess. So how could he dare to be careless? 3 breaths. Chioku moved, his right hand forming into a gigantic, purple-colored hand. There were intricate patterns flickering with light on his palm, as if they were able to shatter the earth. Hum! The Rain Emperor's voice was once again heard. Pung! The roof was pierced through, and they could only see a gigantic golden fist descend down from the skies, crashing ruthlessly towards Chioku. Son of Heaven Fist Technique. All 3 imperial princes gasped at the same time. No matter what kind of weapons they used personally, they had all naturally learnt the Son of Heaven Fist Technique. However, when they saw this golden fist, they only felt endless shock. When the Son of Heaven's fist attacked, the whole world would be flattened. It was irresistible, and there was no counter to it. With this one fist, everyone merely felt as if they were as insignificant as ants. No matter what move they made to resist, it would only be like a mantis trying to stop a chariot, an impossible feat, and their only fate would be to be completely crushed by the imperial might. Chioku's expression changed drastically due to shock, and he hurriedly delivered his own attack upwards, creating a purple-colored nebula that went to receive that golden fist. Indeed, it was like a mantis attempting to stop a chariot in its tracks. With the crushing power of the golden fist, the nebula was instantly shattered into smithereens. The golden fist landed Hong, and an irresistible force gushed out. Pung! Pung! Pang! Pung! Every single person in the main hall was forced backwards as if they were mere stalks of straw. Dust and smoke filled the air, and they could only see that the whole main hall was completely flattened into a plain, and the only person who had not been flung out of the main hall was Chioku. This guy, was he dead or alive? After the dust and smoke had dispersed a little, they could see that Chioku was lying on the ground in the shape of the Chinese character for Big One, and the slightly rising and falling of his chest obviously meant that he was still alive. Everyone inhaled sharply in shock. Chioku was in the spiritual pedestal tier, yet the Rain Emperor was able to crush him like a wretch without even once showing his face. Wasn't the Rain Emperor too powerful already? Was this really the power that someone in the spiritual pedestal tier should have? Even one as arrogant as Feng Yan had his mouth tightly closed. In front of absolute power, everyone could only tremble in fear. Ling Han, Feng Yan, I shall allow the 2 of you to settle between yourselves the private enmity between you 2. But if anyone else wants to interfere, this man will be their example. The Rain Emperor's voice was once again heard, a vibrating rumble. Even if there were 3 others in spiritual pedestal tier present, they were still unable to identify where this voice was coming from. Ling Han, come see me at the Imperial Palace. Chapter 263. Chapter 263. Audience with the Emperor. From start to finish, the Rain Emperor did not even show his face, yet his domineering attitude was enrooted deep into everyone's hearts. Even such powerful elites like Fu Yuansheng and the clan head of the Liu clan felt a deep-set reverence and did not have the slightest intention of resistance. This was a real ruler. Once the order was given, it would be strictly enforced. All of them were his subjects under his imperial graciousness. Ling Han's eyes returned towards the far-off imperial palace, however, as his divine sense had managed to identify that the Rain Emperor's voice had actually originated from there. If anyone else found out, they would definitely grab their heads and exclaim in shock, how could this be possible? There was a distance of at least 10 miles, so how could sound be transmitted so quickly and so clearly here? Moreover, there was still a punch from the Son of Heaven fist technique that actually punched an elite of spiritual pedestal tier unconscious. This was practically like a myth. That was too powerful, wasn't it? Spiritual pedestal tier would definitely not have such power. Ling Han mused internally. Could it be that the Rain Emperor has already broken through to the flower blossoming tier? Though there was only one tier between the spiritual pedestal tier and the flower blossoming tier, the taking of this step was like the gulf between heaven and earth. The spiritual pedestal tier was still considered mortal, whereas the flower blossoming tier would be stepping into the ranks of gods. Only one in the flower blossoming tier would be able to transmit sound over 10 miles as if they were right on the scene. With a single thought, his fist intent had reached its target and easily suppressed an opponent of the spiritual pedestal tier. That's not right. Ling Han frowned slightly. He had somewhat captured a sliver of the Rain Emperor's divine sense, and it should not have reached the flower blossoming tier yet. So this was indeed very strange. Ling Han, I shall allow you to continue living for 10 days. After 10 days, I will personally take your life. Feng Yan laughed coldly and grabbed Chiu Ku in a single move. He leaped up and very quickly disappeared from sight. No one dared to stop him, even if he had killed so many just moments ago. Ling Han, the 7th Imperial Prince, approached, his face filled with delight. He had made the right bet on the Rain Emperor's personality. This ruler of a nation was a domineering man. So how could he be able to tolerate the Winter Moon sect undermining of his authority on his own territory? He would definitely return a powerful counterattack. However, even he had not foreseen that the Rain Emperor's attitude would be as forceful as this, so much that he had directly thrashed Chiu Ku unconscious. No matter what, he had taken the right step, so he would have definitely gained a considerable favor of the Rain Emperor. So he was one step closer to the imperial throne. My imperial father summoned you, so you had better make a move on, he said, all smiles. The Rain Emperor very rarely deigned to see anyone on a one-to-one basis. Previously, merely Qin Yi and Zhao Huan had obtained such an honor. Even them, the imperial princes, very rarely gained the opportunity to see the Rain Emperor alone. Ling Han nodded at him. A friend in need was a friend indeed. In comparison, the performance of the eldest and the 3rd Imperial Prince were far below standard. He glanced at Lu Yutong. His little female attendant was naturally being supported by the clansmen of the Lu clan. He considered it for a moment, but did not go over to say anything, primarily because he was displeased with the Lu clan. The Rain Emperor had clearly expressed his attitude. Moreover, he had delivered a fist straight on the heads of the Lu clan, obviously expressing his displeasure towards the Lu clan. Ling Han believed that the Lu clan would not dare to continue to have secret dealings with Feng Yan. Young Master Han. The eldest and the 3rd Imperial Princes simultaneously approached, a fake smile on their faces while their hearts were ill at ease. They were practically ready to die of regret. No matter how much they had calculated, they had not foreseen the fact that the Rain Emperor would actually make such a domineering move. They witnessed the way Feng Yan had paraded around so arrogantly before, but did not see any kind of reaction from the imperial family, and thought it would be the same this time. They had not thought that there would be any kind of unexpected accident today. If they had known beforehand, they would have put their firm support behind Ling Han. They would then be able to have a deeper relation with the latter, and would also be able to obtain the Rain Emperor's favor. And now, great, they had offended both sides. Ling Han merely smiled calmly and said, I have to meet His Imperial Majesty, so I don't have the time to converse with your Imperial Highnesses. After saying so, he flung his arms and stalked off. The eyes of the eldest and the 3rd Imperial Princes were simultaneously filled with anger. He was a mere humble commoner, and yet he actually dared to show his displeasure in the face of 2 such Imperial Princes as them. But now was not the time to make a fuss over this. The 7th Imperial Prince had suddenly acted, and was now ahead of them in the race for the Imperial throne. In view of the Imperial throne, whatever else could be set aside. The 2 of them exchanged a look and smiled at the same time. Their 7th younger brother's limelight was too bright, so they had to suppress him a bit to ensure that all three of them would once again return to the same starting line. Ling Han gave a nod to Guang Yuan and the rest, and also signaled for Guang Yuan and Zhu Wujiu to bring Hunyo and return first. He meanwhile strode towards the imperial palace. The distance of about 10 miles was only the matter of a dozen minutes for someone in the gushing spring tier, so he was very soon standing in front of the imperial palace. "Please follow me." An imperial guard approached. He had an average-size figure and looked like he was only in his 30s, yet he was already in the spiritual ocean tier. In Rain Country, this was an extremely astonishing fact. Since the Rain Emperor had summoned him, naturally everything was arranged in order to receive him. Ling Han followed the imperial guard and asked, "How do I address you, sir?" "Zai Xiang," the imperial guard replied coolly, seeming to share the same style as Can Yi. "Prime Minister?" Ling Han could not help but blank out as he thought, "Your parents must be disappointed that you are now a martial officer instead." "Xiang, not Xiang," Zai Xiang said calmly. Who knew what kind of Xiang he was talking about one? But since he had explained, it meant that his name was definitely not Zai Xiang, as in Prime Minister. Ling Han lagged and did not continue making a fuss over the issue of names. After all, the other was in the spiritual ocean tier, so he had best not irritate him to the point that he would turn around and smack him flat. This man should be a confidant of the Rain Emperor. He was already in the spiritual ocean tier in his 30s, and once he was fully developed by the Rain Emperor, it was possible that he would be able to break through to the spiritual pedestal tier in his 40s. Zai Xiang was obviously not a talkative man. If Ling Han did not ask questions, he would definitely not open his mouth. As he led Ling Han inwards, all the imperial guards on their way paid their respects to Zai Xiang upon seeing him, without any signs of wanting to question Ling Han's identity. Evidently, Zai Xiang's status had gotten the approval of all the imperial guards. The two of them very quickly arrived at the main heaven hall. This was where the Rain Emperor handled the country's affairs and where the ministers and officials would pay their respects. It was now past the time for the government conference. As a result, the whole hall was visibly empty and spacious. "Go in by yourself," Zai Xiang said coldly. What a cold, unfeeling guy, Ling Han thought as he walked into the main hall. This was the largest palace hall in the imperial hall. The colossal palace hall was held up by tall stone pillars that were as tall as 100 meters, giving one an imposing and grand feeling that would cause one's heart to tremble. Casting an eye over, the whole palace hall was empty. However, Ling Han knew that there was an imperial guard hidden behind each stone pillar, and they were all in the spiritual ocean tier. At the end of the palace hall, there was a throne positioned high up, and on it was seated a man who looked to be in his 50s. He was obviously seated, yet the domineering aura exuding from him was enough to cause one to tremble in fear. The Rain Emperor. He should be turning 60 very soon, but he looked only to be in his early 50s. He really did a good job in maintaining his youthful looks. There was a woman seated by the Rain Emperor's foot, who seemed to be serving him, but Ling Han could tell that this woman was actually in the process of cultivating. It was actually Su Kuexan. They all said that this woman was being doted on, and it was indeed true, since she was actually able to accompany the emperor even by day. However, didn't accompanying the emperor mean that she was supposed to cater to the emperor's needs? How could she be cultivating? This was indeed odd. Moreover, Ling Han could confirm with a single glance that the Rain Emperor was definitely not a man that would be easily influenced by feminine wiles. Otherwise, he would not have been able to obtain the power that he had now. He had half a step into the flower blossoming tier. No, half a step into the flower blossoming tier would only mean that he was close to breaking through to the flower blossoming tier, but in truth he would still be in the spiritual pedestal tier and still a mere mortal. Ling Han's thoughts flashed by quickly in his head, and he figured out that this was probably related to the power of the nation, which allowed the Rain Emperor to stride over that gap of half a step and truly possess the might of an ultimate elite of the flower-blossoming tier. "Young man, you are giving me a headache," the Rain Emperor spoke, and boundless might stirred with his voice. Chapter 264. Chapter 264, Beating. Ling Han raised his clasped hands politely in the Rain Emperor's direction and said, "This young junior hereby pays respects to your Imperial Majesty." Since he had addressed himself as junior, the respects he paid were naturally that of a martial artist to his senior, so there was no need to kneel or bow. If he was greeting the Rain Emperor as a subject, then he would have to kneel. Those were two absolutely different standpoints. The Rain Emperor did not rebuke him. Instead, he smiled and said, "Young man, you are very proud." By his feet, Suka Xan was awakened by the noise. When she opened her eyes and looked at Ling Han, she could not help but look slightly surprised. She had obviously met this young man before, and had even once thought of killing him before, though she had not made the move to in the end. She had never thought that this person would actually be qualified to meet with the Rain Emperor. This was extremely surprising. "Your Imperial Majesty is the real mighty one here. Merely one punch was able to completely defeat that damn attendant of the Winter Moon sect," making this junior's blood boil with excitement. Ling Han complimented. "Ha ha ha ha!" The Rain Emperor laughed loudly, shook his head, and said, "Do you think that just because you speak a little flattery I will forget the trouble you've caused?" Su Coaxian could not help but be astonished. She had been by the Rain Emperor's side for a number of years, but had almost never seen the Rain Emperor laugh so hard before. He had even used a teasing tone to speak to a young man. This was practically unbelievable to her. Ling Han said seriously, "Please forgive me, Your Imperial Majesty." The Rain Emperor humphed and said, "No matter how angry I was, I would not dare to do anything to a black-grade high-level alchemist." Su Coaxian could not help but stare with wide eyes. A black-grade high-level alchemist? This young man in front of her? How could this be? But the Rain Emperor would not be speaking false words. So no matter how unbelievable it was to her, it had to be the truth. Ling Han laughed and said, "I had not yet thanked Your Imperial Majesty for helping me out of a difficult situation. I will definitely repay your favor in the future." Since the Rain Emperor had pointed out his status as a black-grade high-level alchemist, then he would speak with the Rain Emperor as an alchemist. In terms of status, he was only slightly beneath the latter. The Rain Emperor tapped lightly on the armrest of his throne and said, "My eldest, my third, and my seventh son. You have met all of them before. Who do you think is more appropriate to inherit the throne?" Should he be asked this kind of question? Ling Han thought for a moment, then replied, "You should have made your decision long before in your heart, Your Imperial Majesty. I would not dare to speak any lies. You are a black-grade high-level alchemist. Fu Yuansheng and Wu Songlin both take your opinion into account greatly. If you hold a different opinion than I and influence the alchemists not to sell any more medicinal pills to the citizens of Rain Country in the future, then wouldn't that mean destruction for the Rain Empire?" The Rain Emperor said calmly. Ling Han could not help but be covered in a cold sweat. This crime was a bit big, and added together with the fact that rulers tended to be temperamental, if he really thought that Ling Han was going to be a problem that would threaten his imperial authority, then no matter who he was, he would directly eliminate him. He had pushed his alertness to the highest level it could go. If there was any movement from the Rain Emperor, he would instantly enter into the Black Tower. The most that would do would be allowing the Rain Emperor to discover that he had a secret technique that allowed him to teleport instantly or think he had a secret hideout. Even if he was forced to reveal some of his secrets, that was still better than losing his life. Put your little heart safely back into your chest. If I really wanted to kill you, you would not have survived on the whole way here, the Rain Emperor said calmly. Ling Han laughed. Although he looked relieved on the surface, he was not the slightest bit relaxed internally. He was not one who would easily trust anyone. Ling Han, how should I treat you? The Rain Emperor said. An alchemist that can concoct foundation-building pills, the foundations of Rain Country, could be disturbed greatly because of you. Pooh! Suka Xien could finally not hold herself back from coughing. The foundation-building pills that had created so much commotion in the Imperial City were actually concocted by Ling Han? Inconceivable, really inconceivable. He was so young, so how could he actually be able to concoct foundation-building pills? Ling Han thought for a moment, then said, In the future, if I concoct any more foundation-building pills, I can prioritize supplying half to the Imperial family first. Good. The Rain Emperor finally smiled, and the tense atmosphere was instantly dispersed. Accompanying the Emperor was really like accompanying a tiger. An emperor was always temperamental and would kill anyone at the drop of a hat. So even if you wanted to be calm, it wasn't that easily accomplished. Ling Han could not help but criticize silently. If he still had the cultivation he had in his last life, he would definitely have given the Rain Emperor a good thrashing for actually daring to scare him. However, at this moment he could only grimace and said, I was almost scared to death by your Imperial Majesty. The Rain Emperor gave a bit of foreshadowing first. Then came a threat. All that was merely for the foundation-building pills. Haha, you will definitely become an Earth-grade alchemist in the future. By then, even I would have to welcome you heartily. Taking advantage of this time when your wings are not full yet, I naturally have to give you a little beating and bully you a bit, as I will not have the chance to do so in the future, the Rain Emperor said smilingly. Ling Han smiled as well. Actually, the Rain Emperor was also a man with a sense of humor, though that would depend on whether he wanted you to feel that he was an interesting, humorous man. My eldest and my third sons are still a bit lacking in terms of disposition. They have ambition, but do not have the fitting manner for it, the Rain Emperor said, giving a little judgment to his sons. My seventh is a bit too cautious. He is an adequate defender, but will not advance enough. He paused, then said, You should be supporting my seventh. With the support of a future Earth-grade alchemist, I can rest easy and abdicate. I have decided, after my 60th birthday, I shall pass on the throne to my seventh, and from then on, concentrate my focus on martial arts. Suka Xien was greatly shocked, her face paling. She could not help but call out, Your Imperial Majesty. The Rain Emperor pressed down with one hand, stopping her from speaking further, then said, You should leave now as well. Ling Han did not pay any mind to the enigmatic words between the two of them, and said, Congratulations, Your Imperial Majesty. Why are you congratulating me? The Rain Emperor asked, smiling. When you have left behind the matters of the nation, you will be able to concentrate on breaking through to flower blossoming tier, and will be thus able to cast off your mortal chains and ascend to godhood. Ling Han said with a smile. The Rain Emperor could not help his eyes lighting up. Instantly his aura gushed out like the waves of the sea, and he said, You can actually tell my cultivation level. Ling Han smiled slightly and said neutrally, I am an alchemist, so my divine sense has to be much stronger than any ordinary person. The Rain Emperor nodded. This young man was indeed extraordinary. Otherwise, he couldn't have possibly concocted alchemical pills close to Earth grade when he was merely in the gushing spring tier. He once again tapped his finger on the armrest and said, Half a month later, I will organize a feast for my birthday. At that time, there will also be a martial arts competition held in celebration of my birthday. Ling Han did not know what was the significance of these words, so he only nodded and did not reply. For the person who gets the first place in the martial arts competition, the prize will be a treasure in the inner chamber of the National Treasury, the Rain Emperor said calmly. Ling Han was moved instantly. The eye of truth. The Rain Emperor was already half a step into the flower-blossoming tier, and added together with the power of the nation, he was like a god in Rain Country. Thus his eyes and ears were practically everywhere in this country. Most likely, The few deals that he had made with the eldest and the third imperial prince had not escaped the knowledge of this Rain Emperor. Ling Han tensed up. Then what about the issue of the Lu sisters? Technically, he had covered for the criminals that had intended to assassinate an imperial consort. This was no different than committing treason. And he should not know. The Rain Emperor was human, after all. Even if he had broken through to the flower-blossoming tier, he would only be no longer mortal, but he would still be a very far ways off from becoming a god. He could only be able to concentrate his limited attention on a few important people. For example, his 3 sons who all had the ability to qualify for the competition for the throne. Their every move must not have escaped his knowledge, as he secretly compared and mused over which one was more suited to inherit the throne. Thus, the fact that Ling Han had discussed stealing the Eye of Truth with the eldest and the third imperial princes must not have escaped the knowledge of this Rain Emperor. Now, the Rain Emperor had taken out the Eye of Truth as a prize. The unspoken words here were, "I am well aware of all your little moves. As long as you are willing to listen to me, then I will naturally give you some benefits." No wonder he was the ruler of a nation. He was very skilled at manipulating. Chapter 265. Chapter 265. Setting the conditions. With regards to the Eye of Truth, Ling Han was determined to get it. Ling Han thought for a moment, then said, "Your Imperial Majesty, the Eye of Truth involves a mystical power, and by that time there will definitely be uncountable numbers of people participating. Perhaps even elites of the spiritual pedestal tier would shamelessly make a move. I really do not have much confidence. Unless he revealed the Black Tower. However, once the Black Tower was out, there would be ultimate elites from godly tiers descending to snatch it. It was much more important than any mystical power." The Rain Emperor laughed, then said, "You don't have to play the fox in front of me. In the competition this time, I have limited the participants to only those below 30 years old. If you are not able to get first place, then you can only blame yourself for lacking in ability." Ling Han thought for a moment. If only those below 30 could participate, then the only one who could stand against him as an equal was Feng Yan. "You are a citizen of Rain Country. I want you to defeat Feng Yan in public, to show the might of Rain Country," the Rain Emperor said. Indeed, it was exactly like what Ling Han had guessed. Looks like Feng Yan had paraded around too much previously, and he had even casually killed off a number of noble, wealthy people. Previously, the Rain Emperor was angered as well. However, no matter how mighty and domineering the Rain Emperor was, he was the ruler of a nation first and foremost, so he could not simply do anything rash. If he had killed Feng Yan, then that would definitely attract the real elites of the Winter Moon sect. By that time, even if Rain Country was not destroyed, it would still have to pay a colossal price to suit the flames of rage of the Winter Moon sect. This was definitely not something that a mature emperor would do. However, should he just allow Feng Yan to behave so arrogantly and do as he liked? The Rain Emperor was a very domineering man. He naturally could not allow such a troublemaker to create a fuss right in front of his eyes. Since he could not kill Feng Yan, then he would just have to make it so that Feng Yan was defeated publicly, take the edge off his spirit, and teach him a lesson. Ling Han nodded. Even without the Rain Emperor's request, he was definitely not going to have any reservations against Feng Yan. If he had the opportunity, he would definitely not mind killing off this guy. "Go on." The Rain Emperor waved his hand and closed his eyes as if he had fallen asleep. Obviously, he was not intending to speak to Ling Han anymore. Ling Han retreated out of the palace hall and left the imperial palace under Zai Xiang's escort. The latter turned around and walked 2 steps, then suddenly turned back round and said, "Ling Han, do not disappoint the hopes of His Imperial Majesty." Without waiting for Ling Han's answer, he stalked off, looking very forceful. Ling Han shook his head. The Rain Emperor was domineering because he had the ability to support his domineering ways. Every word and movement that Zai Xiang made was an imitation of the Rain Emperor. However, he had only learnt the appearance, yet had not managed to learn the essence. He could not bother himself to call him to account, and headed back towards Huyang Academy instead. Ling Han, was it? A delicate voice was heard from behind him, enchanting and graceful. Ling Han turned to look, and Su Xan was standing right behind him, her shapely, delicate body drawing the eyes of anyone who saw her. However, Ling Han did not give her another look and asked, "Is there anything I can help you with?" He was now a black-grade high-level alchemist, so there was absolutely no need for him to speak reverently to an imperial consort. I had not thought that a minor character would have actually become a grandmaster alchemist by now. Su Xan shook her head, then lowered herself into a slight bow. Her white skirts fluttered like a flower blooming. Xan hereby greets Grandmaster. Ling Han smiled calmly and said, "I dare not accept. Imperial Consort Su, your greeting is much too polite." Su Xan stood back up, pursed her lips into a smile, then said, "Grandmaster, Xan would like to make a request of you." Imperial Consort Su, you seem to have made a request to the wrong person, right? His Imperial Majesty, the Rain Emperor, is the ruler of Rain Country. So whatever you need, the person you should make the request to should be His Imperial Majesty, the Rain Emperor, shouldn't it? Ling Han said. Su Xan sighed and looked a bit sad. If anyone uninvolved had seen, they would definitely be overcome with sympathy for her and touched by her pitiful appearance. Unfortunately, this move was completely useless on Ling Han. Grandmaster does not know, but Xan is only His Imperial Majesty's consort by name, she said slowly when she saw Ling Han was looking completely undisturbed and calm. Oh. Ling Han nodded, then turned around to leave. Wait. Xan hurriedly caught up with him, then said Xan would like to use a cultivation technique to exchange for 10 foundation building pills. She was now at the 3rd layer of the spiritual ocean tier, and there was still a far way until the 9th layer. However, for all cultivation tiers below the flower blossoming tier, breaking through to the next layer was not really that difficult. It was only a matter of time. Thus, she would be able to attempt breaking through to the spiritual pedestal tier a few years later. So, if she had 10 foundation building pills in her possession, the chances of success for her would be greatly increased. Ling Han could not help but laugh and said, Imperial Consort Su has a large appetite. You're talking about 10 foundation building pills, not 10 return origin pills. In truth, in the eyes of an alchemy emperor like him, there was not really that much difference between foundation building pills and return origin pills. Su Xan was also aware that she was asking for too much, but in a bargain, how could she allow the other to know how much she could accept at the first instant? She said, that is because the cultivation technique that Xan has offered for the exchange is definitely worth this price. Oh, tell me then, Ling Han said non-committally. Grandmaster, please follow Xan to a quiet place, Su Xan said. Ling Han was slightly curious, so he agreed. The two of them went to a tea house, requested for a private room, and sat opposite of each other. What is the cultivation technique you are speaking of? Ling Han had no intention to beat around the bush. Su Xan could tell Ling Han was impatient, so she did not continue to tantalize him and replied, Shapeless Heart Sutra, the complete 6 layers of the cultivation technique. Instantly, a few thoughts flew past in Ling Han's head, and he was able to connect the series of events. Putting aside the grade of the Shapeless Heart Sutra, the important thing was that there were the complete 6 layers of the cultivation technique. This meant that it could be cultivated all the way to the flower blossoming tier. And what was the thing that the 9 nations of the desolate north lacked the most? That would be cultivation techniques for the flower blossoming tier. This was what limited the appearance of elites of the flower blossoming tier. Those that had depended on the power of nation being instilled in them to break through were not considered. They were not capable of leaving their own countries at all. Otherwise, once they had lost the support of the power of the nation, they would instantly be returned to their original form. Additionally, if their age had exceeded their natural lifespan, they could even immediately die of old age upon leaving the country's borders. The Rain Emperor had a unique relationship with Su-Coexayan, recalling when she previously said that she was merely the Rain Emperor's consort name. He could mostly confirm that Su-Coexayan must have made a similar deal with the Rain Emperor. The reason she had broken through to the spiritual ocean tier in a few years' time was most likely because she could make use of the power of the nation to aid her in her cultivation. Thinking further, Su-Coexayan fell out with the Falling Flower Court. Could it really be because of a staying youth pill? The real reason should have been the Shapeless Heart Sutra, which caused a desire to take it for herself to arise in Su-Coexayan. Or perhaps the higher ranks of the Falling Flower Court wanted to kill her off to keep the secret, but were instead foiled by Su-Coexayan making the first move, which led to the destruction of the Falling Flower Court. Perhaps Su-Coexayan had fled to Rain Country after that, and reached some kind of agreement with the Rain Emperor. As a result, the Rain Emperor was able to advance one step further and have half a step into the flower blossoming tier, and managed to pry open the door to the flower blossoming tier. It would not take long for him to really step over the threshold into the flower blossoming tier. Su-Coexayan would never have thought that while she had only mentioned the name of a cultivation technique that allowed Ling Han to figure out so many things, if she were to find out, she would definitely be shocked by Ling Han's deduction ability. Ling Han was naturally uninterested in the Shapeless Heart Sutra. Putting aside 6 layers of cultivation technique, even if there were 9 complete layers, he could not bother himself to give it a second look. He said calmly, "I am still very far from the flower blossoming tier, so I'm not interested at this time." Su-Coexayan's mouth was slightly open, as she was incredibly astonished. Chapter 266. Chapter 266 Deal. In Su-Coexayan's thoughts, a 6-layer cultivation technique was extremely tempting to all martial artists in Rain Country. No, all 9 nations of the desolate north, because this allowed one to take the most important step, which was to cast off their mortal body and gain the qualifications to become a god. Of course, the flower blossoming tier was still very far from becoming a god, but it was undoubtedly the first step towards that end. She tossed out such a bait, and believed that Ling Han would definitely be hooked. She was so certain, but had never thought that Ling Han would actually refuse, and what more, refuse without the slightest bit of hesitation. Could it be? "Little brother, could it be that you already possess a 6-layer cultivation technique?" Su-Coexayan hence played cute. She was still very delicately pretty, her charms overflowing. Ling Han asked, "Does Imperial Consort Su think that's possible?" Of course it was impossible. How could Rain Country have a 6-layer cultivation technique? Su-Coexayan was thinking in her head, but Ling Han had refused too decisively, so she still felt as if the latter may also have possibly gotten hold of a 6-layer cultivation technique. She had never wavered so much in her life, so she really felt like she was about to go crazy. Ling Han actively answered her confusion and said, "I am an alchemist, so do I need that high a cultivation level?" That was logical. At such a young age, he was already an alchemist close to Earth grade, so he must have boundless future prospects ahead of him. Moreover, a person had limited energy, so if he spread out his attention over too many fields due to greed, that would only lead to him not being able to master any one field. Su-Coexayan was still a bit doubtful, but it was not proper for her to keep asking. After all, she had something to ask of Ling Han. She hesitated for a long time, then said, "I also have a treasure that I can put into the trade." "Oh, and what is that?" Ling Han asked casually. "I don't know either." Su-Coexayan shook her head, because everything was not like what she had expected. She was completely shaken, and so she hid all her seductive wiles and became serious. Ling Han could not help but break into laughter and asked, "Are you joking, Imperial Consort Su?" How could there be something like this? She said she wanted to trade a treasure, but she didn't even know what it was. If that was the case, how could she be so sure that it really was a treasure? Suka Xan said, 7 years ago, I and a few elders of Mi sect discovered an ancient tomb. We obtained the Shapeless Heart Sutra from there. And beside the Shapeless Heart Sutra, there was also a tightly sealed box that we had no way of opening. She paused a moment, then said, something that could be placed by the side of the Shapeless Heart Sutra. This box must contain something that is similarly valuable. Ling Han smiled slightly, then said, Does Imperial Consort Su want to use this unknown object to exchange for the 10 foundation-building pills then? That's right. Su Koexian nodded. Is Grandmaster willing to gamble on it? All right. Ling Han said without hesitation. Anyways, he could casually concoct foundation-building pills easily and quickly. So even if he had traded them for an ordinary box, that would only be a waste of a few million silver coins and about an hour's time. But what if the box really contained some kind of treasure? Tomorrow, at this time, bring the box over, whereas I will bring the foundation-building pills, he said. Su Koexian was ecstatic, but then she hurriedly confirmed, That's 10 foundation-building pills. Agreed. Ling Han nodded. Deal. Su Koexian was overjoyed at this unexpected turn in events. Ling Han stood up and left. Since he had already decided to accept this transaction, he would naturally have to go and prepare the ingredients he needed. Unfortunately, the herb garden within the Black Tower was not yet ready. Otherwise, he could prepare his own ingredients. After all, he had only left the Mystery Realm just a few days ago, so how could it be possible that he would have gotten all the spiritual herbs ready so quickly? He naturally went to the Heaven's Medicine Pavilion. After thanking Fu Yuansheng, he bought all the ingredients needed to concoct the foundation-building pills, then returned to Huyang Academy. There was a large number of people waiting for him at the entrance who wanted to develop an amiable relationship with him. After all, he had just been summoned to see the Rain Emperor, and the Emperor's concern over him was still going strong. However, how could Ling Han have the mood to deal with them? He merely said a few words and sent off these people. When he entered his courtyard, Hunyo instantly stuck onto him. Ling Han said a few words to her, then brought her with him into the Black Tower. The little girl very happily began to play around, whereas Ling Han began to concoct the alchemical pills. This was naturally a piece of cake to him. After arranging all the ingredients he needed, after a mere hour, 10 foundation-building pills were lying warm in the furnace. The next day, the imperial family released a piece of important news. The Rain Emperor's 60th birthday was right around the corner, and the whole country was naturally going to celebrate with him. Moreover, there was also going to be a very special martial arts tournament to display the military power of the empire. The champion of this tournament would be personally praised by the Rain Emperor, and the prize would be a mystical power. What kind of object was a mystical power? A large majority of people were not aware, but that did not stop everyone from guessing the incredible value of a mystical power the Rain Emperor had taken it out as a prize. So how could it be anything ordinary? All of a sudden, excitement was high in the air. Even the powerful elites of the spiritual pedestal tier of the 8 great clans were restless. But when they saw the rules of participation for the martial arts tournament, quite a number of people wilted as the tournament was only limited to those below 30 years old. True, the future of the empire would naturally fall on the shoulders of the younger generation. So what was the point of old men like them joining in on the excitement? 30 years below, then there would only be 2, and that was Ling Han and Feng Yan. Anyone with eyes could see that this was the tournament stage that the Rain Emperor had set up for the 2 of them to allow them to duel in front of everyone's eyes. Mystical power? Within the Cherishing Flower Pavilion, Yen Tian Zhao mumbled to himself. He had a wine cup in his hand and was seated comfortably, filled with an unworldly air. By his side, there was an old woman who looked vacant, as if she had lost her soul. If one were to look closely, This old woman looked very much like Lady Yin. I was intending to leave Rain Country, but did not think that I would be able to watch such a good show before I left. Now I have even encountered the appearance of a mystical power. There are strong and weak mystical powers, but no matter what, since it is called a mystical power, it must have its use, so I would not mind taking a look at it. Yen Tian Zhao placed the wine cup down, looked towards the old woman, then said with a smile, "Mother, I will become the champion of a martial arts tournament and show my face in front of everyone. Aren't you glad?" She was indeed Lady Yen. But how did she suddenly lose all her beauty and become an old woman? Lady Yen seemed to have become a corpse. After quite a while, a flash of life finally came back into her eyes. Her voice trembled, and she said, "You are not my son. You are a demon. You are a demon." "Wrong. I am indeed your son. It's just that I have some additional experiences." Yen Tian Zhao pointed at his own head, and an incomparably evil smile curled up the corners of his lips. "I still have to thank you, Mother, for transmitting all your cultivation to me. Otherwise, if I wanted to possess the cultivation level I have now, I would have to cultivate at least 8 to 10 years. Lady Yen merely shook her head and said endlessly, "You are not my son. You are not my son." Yen Tian Zhao turned his eyes from her, took up the wine cup, and began to drink. He said to the skies, "Everyone thinks that the champion of this tournament will be either Ling Han or Feng Yan. Then I shall give everyone a slap and let them know that I, Yen Tian Zhao, am still here." In the afternoon, Ling Han went to the tea house he had gone to yesterday to fulfill the deal with Su Kuexan. 10 foundation building pills. Ling Han casually withdrew a jade bottle and placed it on the table. Su Kuexan was very delighted, so she could not help but show off some of her feminine wiles, and said delicately, "Little brother, aren't you scared that big sister will cheat you out of your alchemical pills?" "You can try," Ling Han said calmly. "AI, you don't have the slightest sense of humor." Su Kuexan shook her head and took up a box that was wrapped with a red cloth from her side and placed it on the table. Chapter 267. Chapter 267. 100 Poison Jade Ointment. Of course, Ling Han did not completely trust Su Kuexan. As such, he immediately unwrapped the cloth, and there was indeed a black-colored box inside. It was not made of metal, but rather of wood, and there was a faint sandalwood aroma coming from it. He was in the process of examining the box, whereas Su Kuexan was naturally examining the foundation building pills, and neither of them spoke. There was indeed no way to open it. It was not because it was locked, but rather because it was joined seamlessly together, so there was nowhere one could exert force on. From the looks of it, the only way to open it would be through explosive power. Ling Han looked astonished, because he recognized the type of wood. Connect Origin Heartwood. This was an extremely valuable material. It had 2 special traits to it. Firstly, it was extremely tough and durable, and secondly, it was capable of preventing the dispersal of spiritual qi. Thus, this was a very suitable material to store some valuable medicinal ingredients. Once it was closed, the medicinal ingredients could be stored for 1,000 or even 10,000 years without spoiling. He gave it a shake, and there was something inside. From what he could hear, there should only be one object inside. It felt very heavy, but it was impossible for him to say what exactly it was. "Little brother, big sister thanks you," Su Kuexan said with a delicate smile, putting away the jade bottle with satisfaction. Though she wanted very much to know what was contained inside the wooden box, and wanted even more to confirm that it was a treasure. She had studied it for many years and attempted many different methods, but was still unable to open it. Thus, she decided that she might as well hand it over to Ling Han so that she would no longer have to worry herself over it. After all, what the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. Ling Han ignored her, so she was a bit unsatisfied. However, because she was in a great mood, she did not take it to heart. She pushed open the door and left. After she had left, Ling Han instantly gave a swipe of his hand, and the wooden box had entered into the Black Tower. He did not enter into the Black Tower at the first instant, but instead chose to stand up and leave. Since it was already in the Black Tower, it was destined to belong to him, and no one could possibly take it from him. He returned to his own courtyard in the academy, closed the door, and finally entered the Black Tower. If it was in his last life, it would be a piece of cake for him to open a box made of Connect Origin Heartwood with his cultivation as a Heaven Tier elite. But the cultivation of the Gushing Spring Tier was far from enough to do so. Otherwise, how would Suka Exan have been unable to do anything with the box, even after so many years of it being in her possession? She was in the spiritual ocean tier, after all. However, in the Black Tower, Ling Han was a god. With a single thought, the wooden box was opened, as easy and simple as if he had just merely flipped his hand. Within the box was a piece of jade in the shape of a strip. As soon as the box was opened, a strong fragrance wafted out that caused his spirit to be roused and feel all the pores on his whole body open up. A hint of excitement appeared on Ling Han's face. This was not jade, but a medicinal ointment, 100 poison jade ointment. I never thought that something like this would still exist. He pressed down with a hand, and all the fragrance was suppressed back into the box. He could control everything in the Black Tower as if he was a god. 100 poison jade ointment was not naturally formed, but had to be blended later. It required up to 100 poisonous ingredients as well as 7 fragrance jade to be mixed with a secret method. This was not poison if anyone used this to poison anyone else. That would be a humongous waste. If any single one of these 100 poisonous ingredients were used on its own, then even elites of the flower blossoming tier would die of poison. However, put together and blended with a wondrous ratio, they would suppress each other's poison, and what was supposed to be a deadly poison would be transformed into an excellent medicine. The more poisonous they were, the more plentiful this energy would naturally be. However, if anyone were to directly swallow it as it was now, that would definitely be a direct path to death, because the energy that originated from the mixture of these 100 poisonous ingredients was too terrifying. It would be a piece of cake for even a flower blossoming tier elite to burst from it. However, if it was added together with 7 fragrance jade, then the violent, explosive energy could be released in a calm, peaceful way, and would thus allow it to be absorbed. Naturally, 100 poison jade ointment was not to be swallowed, but rather rubbed on one's body. It would enter into the body by being absorbed through the skin. One could still eat it, but when these 100 poisons entered one's stomach, they would still cause a corresponding effect on the body. What was amazing was that one with higher cultivation level could rub in more of it, whereas those with a lower cultivation level should rub in less, and it could be used by people in different cultivation levels. It would allow one to increase one's cultivation level, strengthen the physique, and was an extremely valuable treasure. It was easy to find the poisonous ingredients, but 7 fragrance jade was much too rare. Even in his last life, when he had had so many resources in his grasp, he had only managed to blend it once, and the amount produced could not compare to this strip that he now had. Such a treasure indeed needed to be sealed by Connect Origin Heartwood. Otherwise, the medicinal effects would disperse very quickly and could not be kept for even a single month. He had no idea who it was that was so wealthy that he actually had a box made of Connect Origin Heartwood and 100 poison jade ointment buried with him. This was practically a waste of colossal proportions. Just in time to benefit me. Ling Han said with a smile as he removed his clothing and began to rub in the 100 poison jade ointment onto his body. A cooling feeling gushed out, relaxing his whole body. Feng Yen seemed to be very sure of himself. He seems confident that he'd be able to defeat me after 10 days. Now that I think of it, the basis for his confidence should be that he would be able to break through within these 10 days. Cultivation tiers were a different level before, so there is a big difference between having broken through and not yet broken through. As Ling Han sat in a cross-legged position, he continued to circulate the 5 elements heaven grade skill to absorb the medicinal effects. Within the Black Tower, he could even detain the ointment's effects and ensure it was entirely used on him without the slightest bit being wasted. This was a very shocking thing. If the medicinal effects could be absorbed completely, this was practically scary. There is only 10 days left until the martial arts tournament. I can't possibly break through to the spiritual ocean tier in such a short time, but every little bit of my ability I can increase counts. I am definitely going to get the Eye of Truth. After only a while, Ling Han felt his whole body heat up. The ointment was now completely effective, and he felt as if his skin was about to tear as he felt an extraordinary agony. Fuck, I have no experience, so I rubbed in too much. He bared his teeth. Though he had also mixed the 100 poison jade ointment in his last life, he had used it on his 4 disciples. At that time, even the weakest of the 4 of them was already in the spiritual pedestal tier. He had decreased the amount, but there was still a very far gap between the gushing spring tier and the spiritual pedestal tier, so it still caused him to exclaim. Thankfully, he had cultivated the body of rock cliff. Not only was his defense terrifyingly strong, he could even transform into rock and cut off his feelings of pain. When he actively circulated it, the agony instantly disappeared, but he could clearly see cracks appear on his skin and fresh blood seep out of his wounds. He found a bit of joy in his suffering as he thought that, fortunately, he had not rubbed it on that important place. Otherwise, he would really want to cry now. There was a powerful energy spreading out in his body, stimulating the continuous expansion of a spring, which gushed out waves of origin power. After about 3 hours, Ling Han stopped. The ointment that he had rubbed on his body was completely absorbed, and his cultivation level had gone up to the late stage of the 5th layer of the gushing spring tier. By the day of the martial arts tournament, his cultivation should be able to reach the 8th layer of the gushing spring tier. If it's the 8th layer against the spiritual ocean tier, I should manage. Ling Han nodded. His condition was a bit special, as his battle prowess far exceeded his cultivation level. With the circulation of the indestructible heaven scroll, the wounds on his body healed very quickly. He summoned clear water and washed off the bloodstains on his body, then dressed. Hunyo actually did not come pester him today. Instead, she was very obediently sitting inside the Black Tower. Ling Han's divine sense, swept over a little girl, was actually in the process of breaking through to Gushing Spring Tier. A 5-year-old in the Gushing Spring Tier. Just the thought of it would make one dumbstruck. Chapter 268. Chapter 268. News from both sides. Feng Yan once again announced that he would take part in the martial arts tournament and would defeat and kill Ling Han during the tournament. The restrictions for the participation in this martial arts tournament were already confirmed, and the final battle would definitely be the battle of the Titans between Feng Yan and Ling Han. However, Feng Yan's announcing that he would kill Ling Han in such an unrestrained manner still very vividly showed his usual arrogant attitude. Ling Han, on the other hand, was a bit passive, because the Rain Emperor only wanted him to defeat Feng Yan, but did not say that he could kill the latter. No matter how forceful and domineering the Rain Emperor was, he was also the ruler of a nation and so had to think of the bigger picture. In that case, he definitely could not allow a life-or-death enmity to form between Rain Country and the Winter Moon sect. If Ling Han really killed Feng Yan, then the Rain Emperor would definitely imprison Ling Han and deliver him to the Winter Moon sect without the slightest hesitation. There was no need to doubt that was the only result. If Ling Han was only one person, that was fine. Even if he committed murder, he could directly enter into the Black Tower and hide for a while. After that, he would naturally be able to leave safely. How could it be possible that the Rain Emperor would stand guard outside the Black Tower all day? Moreover, he would have no idea what means Ling Han had used to disappear. The problem was that Ling Han had his family to think of. He could flee, but how were Ling Dongxing and the others supposed to flee? Ling Han could not help but be troubled. How could he kill Feng Yan and still ensure his own safety? He kept thinking over the matter, and came to the conclusion that it was impossible, because the Rain Emperor would definitely not allow something like this to happen. He would definitely stand by during the tournament, so that he could act to resolve any dangerous situations at any time, whether it was Ling Han or Feng Yan that was in danger. One of them was the disciple of a spiritual infant tier elite, whereas the other was an alchemist that close to earth grade. Whichever one of them died, the Rain Emperor would not be able to make a good justification for it. The current Rain Emperor was practically in the flower blossoming tier now with the aid of the power of the nation, and his ability was far from what could be imagined to commit murder in front of his eyes. There was no way it was possible, and Chiu Ku was the best example of it. Since that was the case, Ling Han also let out the news that he had become an Earth-grade high-level alchemist and caused some gloom to Feng Yan as well. Moreover, he had never lost in his opposition with Feng Yan before. Feng Yan, on the other hand, lost a brother and a cousin, so he should be even more displeased. After the news was released, he did not know how much mental gloom Feng Yan was experiencing, but the whole imperial city completely boiled over because of this news. In comparison with Feng Yan, who was taken as a disciple by a spiritual infant tier elite, something that would only cause envy, jealousy, and hatred and make others say that Feng Yan must have been so lucky, Ling Han was completely different. The status of a black-grade high-level alchemist could only be obtained through one's own personal capabilities, so it was 100% genuine ability. Moreover, the Heavens Medicine Pavilion and the Spirit Treasures Pavilion both testified that those 9 foundation-building pills were concocted by Ling Han, an alchemical pill that was close to Earth grade, and the quality had reached a shocking 13 stars. What kind of concept was that? Ling Han was definitely going to become an Earth-grade alchemist. There had never appeared an Earth-grade alchemist from Rain Country. But this history was about to be changed, because as long as Ling Han did not fall, then it was a sure thing that he would become an Earth-grade alchemist in future. Within only about half a day's time, Ling Han's courtyard had become very lively and crowded. Previously, most had just been observing. After all, in the battle to the death between Ling Han and Feng Yan, the majority were more optimistic about Feng Yan. After all, he was the disciple of a spiritual infant tier elite, and could even casually draw out a decree, so who knew how many other treasures he possessed? But now, even if a spiritual infant tier elite was personally here, he would have to consider carefully if he could really act. After all, the status of an alchemist that was close to Earth grade was much too sensitive. A slight change would affect everything else. If a colossal body like the Alchemist Association was roused, what would be the result? With these thoughts, they naturally wanted to flatter Ling Han and form an amiable relationship with him. Moreover, the fact that Ling Han had created a great commotion at Lu Yutong's wedding had spread all over the city, a further motivation for many to come with marriage proposals, wanting to marry their daughters to Ling Han. This young man did not only have a brilliant future, he was loyal and faithful too. He was definitely a good son-in-law material. In the beginning, Ling Han was still polite, but as time passed, he grew impatient and closed the doors to his courtyard. Who would dare barge in without an invitation? Black-grade high-level alchemists would be considered as a big boss of alchemy in Rain Country, and there were only 2 such bosses in the past. Moreover, these 2 now seemed to follow Ling Han's lead. However, it was easy to make these people leave, but when Qi Yongyi and the others came, Ling Han could only choose to receive them. After all, though they were not able to become Ling Han's best friends, they had all come from the Yuan city after all. They had all helped to rescue Ling Dongxing previously, and Ling Han still remembered this kind deed they did for him. He had arranged 2 banquet tables in his courtyard as celebration for his becoming a black-grade high-level alchemistohim. This was naturally a joke. The one and only alchemy emperor would need to celebrate for such a paltry reason. However, he could not resist the other's passion, and so could only reluctantly concede. He withdrew some ingredients from the Black Tower and hired a cook from a restaurant to cook at the last moment. Soon, delicious dishes were prepared one after another. This was really the most delicious food, as the ingredients themselves were extraordinarily fresh. They had just simply had a taste before getting into a battle for the food, making for a battered picture. The cook watched all this happen with confusion. One had to know that though he was quite a good cook, but to see people coming to blows because of his food, this was really the first time. Could it be that his cooking had greatly improved in recent days without his knowledge? After preparing the next dish, he himself had a taste, and instantly felt as if his tongue was about to melt. Delicious, definitely delicious, indescribably delicious, unimaginably delicious. After tasting one bite, and another bite after that, unconsciously he felt like he was half full. It was then that he suddenly realized that he had eaten half of the dish. When the others discovered this, he was naturally thrashed and could only continue to cook with a bruised and battered face. Oh no, this taste is too delicious. Once I eat it, I can't forget about it. After I've eaten it, I want to eat some more still. What am I going to do in future? Someone shrieked miserably. That's right, this is definitely not because of the cook's skill, but because the ingredients themselves are too fresh and delicious. Ling Han, where did you buy them? Quick, tell me, or I'll have no way of continue to live. Come on, say it. They had all forgotten that they had come to celebrate in honor of Ling Han's becoming a black, grade high-level alchemist, as they only had the utterly delicious food in their minds now. Ling Han merely offered a faint smile. He would of course not say that these vegetables were all grown in the Black Tower. As for chickens and pigs, because they had only been reared for a short time, he had not withdrawn any to slaughter. Otherwise, there would be even more delicious ingredients. When they were halfway through their feast, Lu Yutong arrived gracefully. Thank you. She looked at Ling Han tenderly. A man was willing to barge into the Lu clan and create a commotion at her wedding all for her sake. What courage did that require? Anyone else would not even dare to think of doing such a thing. You're my little female attendant, so how could I allow you to marry someone you don't love? Ling Han said calmly. He had a fondness for both Lu Yutong and Li Xichan, but it was still a bit far from romantic love. After all, he had lived 2 lifetimes. In his last life, he had lived to the ripe old age of 200 years old. Though he had spent the majority of his time on alchemy, how could his heart be so easily conquered? Additionally, he only had martial arts in his eyes, so if one wanted to create feelings of love in him, it was not an easy feat. Lu Yutong looked as if she had been suddenly splashed with a pail of cold water. The heat in her eyes instantly grew faint, but she very quickly reignited her battle spirit. Since Ling Han was able to disregard his life and ruin the wedding for her sake, then how could she retreat? Worse comes to worst, she'd just have to fight a war of attrition with him. As long as she continued to stay by his side, why did she have to fear that she wouldn't be able to conquer his heart someday? Hey, little female attendant, what wonderful thing are you thinking about? You're actually salivating at it. She was just immersed in her wonderful fantasies when she heard Ling Han's teasing voice. Chapter 269. Chapter 269. Regular Appearances of Monsters. Qi Yong Yi, Bailey Tingyin, and the others were all extremely regretful that they had not firmly supported Ling Han, and continued to call a toast to Ling Han and flatter him endlessly at the banquet, wanting to mend this crack in their relations. However, even if the broken pieces of a mirror were joined back together, how is it possible that the crack would disappear? What they've missed out on, it was destined that they would not be able to regain. Meanwhile, Zhu Wujiu, Jin Wuji, and Li Hao were exceptionally pleased. The man they followed was actually a black-grade high-level alchemist. This made them feel as if they were living in a fantasy. Such an important person was capable of standing on equal ground with the clan heads of the 8 great clans, and he actually called them as brothers. It was really impossible for them to believe this reality. As for Guang Yuan, he was very gloomy. This brat had really hidden himself way too deeply, causing his heart to pound like crazy and lose sleep for a considerable number of days. However, Ling Han gave him a cultivation technique that swept away all his gloom. The complete version of the large Sun Heaven Heart Scroll, and there were 5 layers of the cultivation technique. He only had in his possession 4 layers, and there was some damage done to it as well. As a result, though this was obviously an Earth-grade, mid-level cultivation technique, he could only display the power of a Black-grade high-level cultivation technique in his hands. Even so, it allowed him to become one of the top 10 strongest elites of the spiritual ocean tier among loose cultivators, which was proof enough of the might of the large Sun Heaven Heart Scroll. Now that he had obtained the complete version of the large Sun Heaven Heart Scroll, he had also obtained the hope to break through to the spiritual pedestal tier, instantly exciting him so much his scalp was completely numbed. He was practically about to break out into sobs. "Little bastard, you can't play like this," Guang Yuan said faintly. As Ling Han gave him this cultivation technique after the banquet was over and everyone had left, he did not fear that his all-powerful image of a spiritual ocean tier elite would be lost. Ling Han deliberately stretched out a hand and said, "Big brother Guang, if you're not satisfied with it, then you can return the cultivation technique to me. Get lost. Something that has entered into my pocket will of course belong to me." Guang Yuan quickly broke into a run and called out, "I'm going off to cultivate. If you're planning to get into a fight, just say the word. I've decided, since I've already boarded your ship of thieves, brat, then I'll just go all the way on this path of darkness." Ling Han could not help but laugh. This Guang Yuan was really quite an interesting person. However, he was also a very brave man, which was what convinced him to pass on the large Sun Heaven Heart Scroll with a light heart. As long as one obtained his trust, then no one would experience any loss, but instead earn sky-high, soaring profits. He was the alchemy emperor, and there was no need to worry about alchemical pills in the first place. Moreover, he also used to be an elite of the heaven tier, so he had various cultivation techniques and martial arts techniques all memorized inside his head. He could simply take any one of them out, and it would be enough to drive spiritual infant tier elites to blows, fighting over it. The night passed, and early the next morning, the eldest and the 3rd imperial princes came to visit one after the other. They wanted to mend the relations with Ling Han, but how could it be that Ling Han would bother with them? The type of person he most hated were those so-called friends who were obviously dragging you down, yet insisted that it was for your own good. He had never given face to such type of people, and would simply thrash them and chase them away. Both the eldest and the 3rd imperial princes left angrily, but Ling Han had already revealed his identity as a big boss of alchemy, so no matter how displeased they were, how could they dare to be rude to such a person? Even if they actually ascended the throne and became the emperor, they would still have to be polite in front of Ling Han. What more when they were only mere imperial princes now? The 7th imperial prince, on the other hand, did not come. He was the only one that could afford to stay calm in this tense situation, so he was naturally not the slightest bit anxious. One day after another passed, and Ling Han would rub the 100 poison jade ointment on his body every day to quickly increase his own cultivation level. The advantage of this medicinal ointment was not only in the fact that it could speed up the rate in which one increased his cultivation level, but also because it had few side effects. It was not like the 4 transformations pill that would leave behind remnants of poison in one's body after one swallowed it for some time. He would have to stop and wait for the traces of poison to disperse before he could continue to swallow any more. Another 2 days passed, and a sizable commotion was heard from the Black Tower. Hunyo had broken through. The gushing spring tear. After coming out from the Black Tower, she leaped into Ling Han's arms and said proudly, "Nyo can help Ling Han now." "Nyo is very awesome," Ling Han said with a loud laugh, patted her head, thought for a moment, then continued, "Come, let us have a spar and see how powerful you are now." The 2 of them went back into the Black Tower. This was a world of its own. So no matter how fiercely they fought, they would not have to worry that it would be found out by anyone outside the Black Tower. Moreover, the space in here was large and sturdy enough. Even if they had already reached the shattering void tier, they would not have to worry about destroying the Black Tower. What more when the two of them were only in the gushing spring tier at the present? Once Hunyo got into a fight, her ferocious nature would be completely revealed. Every move and technique was extremely vicious. Not only that, it seemed that she also had a kind of ability that could allow her to instantly teleport within a short distance. It was not really very far that she could move, just a few inches, but in a battle, a miss was as good as a mile. This kind of ability was extremely effective in practice and very scary. If it was not for the fact that Ling Han was God inside the Black Tower, he would not have been able to capture Hunyo's instant teleportation. Because the little girl was really moving too fast, she created afterimages, and there was completely no way to sense where she had moved to. To fight with Ling Han in the Black Tower, even an ultimate elite of the Shattering Void tier would be brought to their knees, because this was naturally extremely unfair. Ling Han merely stayed on the defense and allowed Hunyo to attack as she liked to make a judgment on the little girl's current battle prowess. The result was astonishing to him, because even a conservative estimate of the little girl's current battle prowess was at least 9 battle stars. When he was in the first layer of the gushing spring tier, he also had about 9 or 10 battle stars, and Hunyo actually managed to match him. There were 2 main reasons why the little girl's battle prowess was so terrifying: speed and instant teleportation. Of course, her claws were exceptionally sharp as well, so much that they could rip through the defenses of an opponent in the 9th layer of the gushing spring tier. Otherwise, if she was only capable of hitting her target but was unable to wound him, then it would be all pointless. The root of all this should be that human-shaped spirit base inside Hunyo's dantian. This was really too freaky. Just thinking about it now caused Ling Han's blood to run cold. And with Hunyo now in the gushing spring tier, Ling Han could only somewhat sense the little girl's aura, as it was more and more difficult to sense now. One had to understand that he had the divine sense of the heaven tier, and his senses were definitely not beneath a real elite of the heaven tier. But even he was close to being unable to see through Hunyo. What kind of concept was that? He believed that once Hunyo had broken through to the spiritual ocean tier, then he would definitely be no longer capable of detecting the little girl's cultivation level. There are really too many monsters in this lifetime. Ling Han concluded. It had not even been a year since he had been revived, but he had already seen the corpse of an ultimate elite of the Shattering Void tier first, and then there was the appearance of a living, damaged god. The 1,000-corpse sect that had vanished without any traces for an unknown number of years had once again appeared, and there was also Yen Tian Zhao. That evil aura made him feel despise or even unease. In comparison, Feng Yan had become a minor issue on the other hand, and he was still one of the more normal variety. Forget it. I won't think about it any more. However powerful they are not as awesome as the Black Tower. If they anger me, then I'll dominate all of them. Ling Han did not continue thinking about it, but continued to work hard on cultivating. On the day of the martial arts tournament, he wanted to beat Feng Yan completely in public. The days passed one after another, and the day of the Rain Emperor's 60th birthday grew closer and closer. Not only did the kings of the other areas come personally or sent their heirs to offer their well wishes, even the other 8 great nations sent out important high-ranking people as envoys, delivering birthday gifts. The imperial city was completely lively. It was as if the whole city was celebrating New Year, as each house was decorated with lanterns and colored banners. And it was at this time that the Chun clan could no longer resist and decided to surrender. The Earth and Water faction came every single day to crash the shops under the Chun clan's possession, and together with Ling Han, who would rather lose money and continue to attack them, the source of income of the Chun clan was completely cut off in an instant. They were about to be forced into desperate straits after over a month of such treatment. At first, the Qin clan wanted to continue standing firm with the help of Sun Ziyan status, but as the news of Ling Han becoming a black-grade high-level alchemist spread out, one of the higher-ups of the Sun clan stepped out directly and made Sun Ziyan divorce the girl from the Qin clan. With this, the Chen clan had lost their last hope. Chen Yunxiang died of excessive overflow and ended his repulsive life. Ling Han did not continue to expand his attacks and decided to allow this matter to come to an end. Chapter 270. Chapter 270. Birthday Celebration of the Rain Emperor. Ling Han continued to prepare himself for the upcoming battle and tried his best to increase his cultivation level. If he wanted to battle an opponent of the spiritual ocean tier while he himself was still in the gushing spring tier, he would still have to be cautious regardless of how monstrously talented he was. After all, Feng Yan was indeed exceptional. Otherwise, he would not have been taken as disciple by an elite of the spiritual infant tier. He was confident, but was definitely not blindly arrogant. Finally, the Rain Emperor's 60th birthday had arrived. The grand banquet would be held for a total of 3 days, and the martial arts tournament would be held on the last day as the grand climax for the celebration. The name of an alchemist that was near to Earth grade was too popular. Not only did the various kings of Rain Country come pay him a visit, but even the envoys of the other 8 nations attempted all means to meet with Ling Han. They had even released the rumor that as long as Ling Han was willing to go to their respective nations, then it would be a small token to carve out a territory for him and name him as king. Ling Han had Guang Yuan play the role as guard, who was in charge of dispatching all those who came to visit. However, in the case of the Deyuan king, he made an exception for him and personally received the former. After all, the Deyuan king treated him quite well when he was in Deyuan City, and the Ling residence was still under the jurisdiction and the authority of Deyuan City. Thus, he was willing to give the Deyuan king some face. Indeed, the Deyuan king struck his chest and assured him that when his position was passed on to his son, or even his grandson, the Ling clan would continue to stand firm in Grey Cloud Town. Of course, respect and honor had to be mutual. Ling Han gave it some thought and gave 2 foundation-building pills to the Deyuan king. The stronger the ability of this king, the more he would be able to take care of the Ling clan. This naturally made the Deyuan king both touched and excited. At first, he had thought that the spiritual ocean tier would be the highest he could achieve, yet he had never imagined that he could actually see the hope of breaking through to the spiritual pedestal tier. This made him even more determined to protect Ling clan. Ling Han was able to give him foundation-building pills now. Then what about 10 years or 20 years later? Wouldn't he be able to hand out alchemical pills that could help one to break through to the flower blossoming tier, or even the spiritual infant tier? 2 days later, the last day for the Rain Emperor's birthday celebration had arrived. In other words, it was the day of the martial arts tournament. Ling Han brought with him Hunyao, whereas Guang Yuan, Zhu Wujiao, and Li Hao followed at his side. Then, on their way there, they were joined by Qi Yongyi, Li Dongyu, Jin Wuji, and the others. They soon arrived at the hunting grounds at the outskirts of the imperial city. This was the location for today's martial arts tournament. At this time, there were various grandstands constructed here. The 8 great clans and the envoys from the other nations were naturally occupying the best viewing positions, followed by the various kings of Rain Country, then those middle-class clans that had a spiritual ocean tier elite in their ranks, and finally the respective sects and associations. And surrounded by the grandstands was the stage for today's martial arts tournament. It was not really a stage per se, but a small hill. The hill was about 1,000 feet tall and had just been constructed recently. There were 32 paths at the foot of the hill, but these paths would pair up and become 16 paths on the next level. As the paths went on to the next level, they would continue to pair up and become 8 paths for paths, 2 paths, and finally 1 path that was directly headed to the top of the hill. There was a throne placed at the top of the hill, but there was no one seated on it at this point in time. Ling Han. Lu Yutong and Li Si-chan both approached. The former had come with her clan, whereas the latter had come with her master, so they had both arrived a bit earlier than Ling Han. Ling Han smiled and began to chat with those around him as he waited for the martial arts tournament to begin. The eldest imperial prince and the other imperial princes were naturally already here. By now, the eldest and the third imperial princes did not even give Ling Han a second look, whereas the seventh imperial prince offered Ling Han a friendly smile. Meanwhile, the other imperial princes and princesses all looked at Ling Han curiously. This young man looked so young. So how was he able to become a big boss of alchemy? Even they would have to respectfully and politely address him as Grandmaster. At noon, someone announced in a loud voice, "His Imperial Majesty has arrived." Shwa! Everyone stood up to receive the Emperor's arrival. The Rain Emperor approached with great strides. He did not release the aura of someone who had half a step into the flower-blossoming tier and looked extremely casual. However, as the Emperor, every move he made had a domineering imperial grace, so he still caused those present to unconsciously feel utmost respect for him. Behind the Rain Emperor, there were 12 imperial guards. Zai Xiang and Xie Chong were in the first row, and were standing about 30 feet behind the Rain Emperor, looking solemn. The Rain Emperor directly walked to the foot of the hill. With a leap, he had flown up to the top of the hill, sitting down on the throne at the top. He pressed a hand down, then said, "Please rise, my subjects." "Thank you, Your Imperial Majesty." Only now did everyone return to their respective seats. The rules of the martial arts tournament today are as follows. Participants are to climb up the hill from the foot of the hill. "The first person to arrive in front of me will be awarded," the Rain Emperor said. He did not speak very loudly, but his voice was very clearly transmitted into everyone's ears. Though the Rain Emperor did not specifically say what the award was going to be, but the imperial family had already released the news that it would be a mystical power. Instantly, the participants looked excited. There was a total of 32 paths headed towards the top. If they were fast enough, they would be able to avoid any strong enemies and be the first person to arrive at the top to pay their respects to the Rain Emperor. So what if there was Ling Han and Feng Yan? "It's all right if I'm no match for you, as long as I can run faster than the two of you." Even the envoys from the other nations felt the urge to participate. However, which envoy was not aged? They were here to represent the image of their respective nations. Envoys not only needed to have adequate ability, but a good reputation and be mature enough. In this manner, even the youngest among the foreign envoys was older than 50 years old. Firstly, the participants were checked to avoid anyone over 30 years old participating. If someone like that got the first place, then Rain Country would be completely humiliated. The second requirement was only those in the Gushing Spring tier could participate, and those who were in the Element Gathering tier and below should not come and join in on the excitement. With these two restrictions in place, the only ones who were qualified to participate were only those particularly powerful disciples of Huyang Academy. Xie Chong and Zai Xiang personally performed the check. Ling Han stepped up to register his participation and was naturally approved at the first instant. Just from his face alone, it was obvious he had not yet reached 20, what more 30 years old. Additionally, his cultivation was at the first layer of the Gushing Spring tier, so just enough to qualify. "Niu wants to register too." Hunyo exclaimed. Xie Chong and Zai Xiang gave her a glance. They were both seated, and there was a long table in front of them with a screen hanging down. Hunyo's head was not even tall enough to be seen over the table, and due to the angle, neither Xie Chong nor Zai Xiang saw Hunyo. Thus, they were a bit surprised when they heard this voice. "Pa!" Hunyo stretched out a hand and smacked the table heavily, saying in displeasure, "Nyo wants to register. You two didn't hear." Pooh! When those around saw this, they could not help but laugh. This was really too funny. A kid that looked to be about 5 or 6 years old actually announced she wanted to participate. "Little miss, This is not the place for you to play. You should quickly go somewhere else, Xia Chong said with a smile. Hunyo was very angry. She has never had a good temper to begin with, and was about to fly into a rage. Let her participate. The Rain Emperor's voice was heard from the top of the hill. There was a hint of shock on his voice. He was in control of the whole country and government, and was capable of using power of the nation. Within the boundaries of Rain Country, he had ultimate power as if he was a god. Thus he could somewhat sense Hunyo's aura, and could tell that she was a real, genuine gushing spring tier martial artist. This startled him to great heights, a 5 or 6-year-old in the gushing spring tier. The Rain Emperor could not help but glance at Ling Han. This brat was a freak, and the people around him were indeed also freaks. What? The Rain Emperor's words caused all the people to be astonished. Could it be that such a small girl was actually in the gushing spring tier? However, no matter how much they tried to sense for Hunyo's aura, they all thought that this was just an ordinary little girl, and there was nothing remarkable about her. When they saw how Hunyo had one hand holding tightly onto a corner of Ling Han's shirt, quite a considerable number of people understood. It must be that the Rain Emperor was giving some face to Ling Han, and allowed Hunyo to make trouble at the tournament. It was all right, there was no issue about it. This was just a little girl, so the most she could do would probably be give them a laugh. These people would be very quickly smacked in the face with reality. Chapter 271. Chapter 271. Two great elites of the spiritual ocean tier. Lu Yutong stepped up and registered. Aside from her, Can Yi and Zhao Huan too stepped forward. There was still a considerable number of disciples in gushing spring tier in Huyang Academy, after all. The allure of obtaining a mystical power was exceptional. As long as there was the slightest bit of hope, they wanted to try, especially in the case that as long as they were fast enough, they could completely leave their competitors behind in the dust. So it was fine even if they were slightly weaker in terms of battle prowess. Ling Han saw Sun Ziyan, and the latter forced out a smile in his direction. Then he immediately turned around and left. It seemed like such a long time ago that Sun Ziyan had thought Ling Han was not worthy of regard, but it had only been 1 or 2 months, and he now had to address Ling Han respectfully as Grandmaster. Such a large gap caused him to be unable to face Ling Han and speak with him at all. Ling Han smiled. He would, of course, not lower himself to Sun Ziyan's level. However, if the latter continued to be blind, then he'd just have to casually stomp him into the ground. "Feng Yan's here," someone called out, and those present all turned around to look. Indeed, Feng Yan was approaching with great strides. With every step he took, there actually appeared a silver-colored, dazzling light under his foot. Each step gave rise to a bright dazzle as if he was a god. "The spiritual ocean tier!" someone exclaimed in shock. A spiritual ocean tier elite was capable of releasing their martial intent outside their bodies, or they could engrave it into a weapon to become a spirit tool, or draw it on talisman paper to form spirit talismans. For martial artists, this was an extremely important stage. In Rain Country, there were a large number of the gushing spring martial artists. All the great clans had no shortage of such martial artists, but higher up the ladder, there were pitifully few martial artists in the spiritual ocean tier. Further up the ladder, there were an even rarer few martial artists in spiritual pedestal tier. As a result, the spiritual ocean tier could be considered as the real mid-level pillars in Rain Country or the 9 nations of the desolate north. Anyone in this cultivation level could be claimed as a powerful warrior. Feng Yan was only 24 years old, yet he had shockingly reached the spiritual ocean tier. This was extremely astonishing, and in the history of Rain Country, he could definitely be ranked within the top 10 or even higher. However, though the spiritual ocean tier martial artists could release their martial intent outside their bodies, this would use up energy, so who would do it for no reason? Feng Yan deliberately came late and was obviously expressing a kind of attitude he did not pay any regard to the Rain Emperor, and he began releasing his martial intent right upon his arrival, which was a further show of his ability and an attempt to humiliate Ling Han. The spiritual ocean tier against the gushing spring tier, wouldn't that mean an absolute, one-sided domination? The mystical power would belong to him, and whether Ling Han was killed or heavily wounded would depend on his mood at the time. Indeed, aside from Ling Han and Hunyao, all the participants' expressions changed greatly. Against an elite of the spiritual ocean tier, what martial artist in the gushing spring tier would be able to find the courage to battle him? Ling Han. Feng Yan's domineering gaze turned towards him. I had never thought that you would have actually become a black-grade high-level alchemist. I'll give some face to the Alchemists Association and not kill you. I'll just cut off your 2 legs. After all, you only need your hands to concoct alchemical pills. When these words were said, a storm of protest rose among the crowd. The only one in Rain Country who would dare to threaten a black-grade high-level alchemist in this way was probably just Feng Yan. Even the Rain Emperor had to be polite to such a big boss of alchemy. Mad, he was indeed mad. Ling Han smiled calmly and said, I've once cut off 2 arms of your brother, so I can't make an exception for the elder brother. Then, I'll just have to cut off both your arms and legs. Who? The others all wiped off the cold sweat collected on their foreheads. These 2 people were indeed hot-tempered. From the very first moment, they already announced ruthlessly their intention to cripple each other. Ha 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 ha. Feng Yan laughed loudly and said darkly, You are merely in the gushing spring tier, so how do you plan to fight me? All right, I'm definitely going to cripple you today. Where do you find so much nonsense to spout? Are you a chatterer? Ling Han asked disdainfully. Feng Yan, on the other hand, did not get angry. He withdrew his martial intent. He wouldn't be able to bear continuing to maintain this condition. A cold smirk appeared at the corners of his lips. Today he would gain a mystical power and cripple Ling Han's legs as an interest. Afterwards he would still kill Ling Han. It was fine as long as no one found out. The status of an alchemist only caused others not to dare kill Ling Han in public. He would be well known, and Ling Han not only would have to swallow the bitter results, he would also have both his legs crippled. Even if he managed to reattach them, his legs would be much less nimble than before, which meant only darkness on his path of martial arts. After Feng Yan had arrived, no one else dared to register, as they were all scared off by his vicious might. He was in the spiritual ocean tier now, so he was practically invincible. However, it was just at this moment that a short young man walked over. He had a shy smile on his face as he said, I would like to register. Ling Han's eyes narrowed. Yan Tian Zhao. The first time he saw Yan Tian Zhao, this young man gave him an incredibly evil feeling. The second time they met, his evil air was still there, but Ling Han was no longer able to see through him. This was the third time, and Ling Han was still unable to see through him, as if there was a layer of fog covering this person, just like Hunyao. Hold on. A thought suddenly flashed in Ling Han's head. Could it be? Who are you? Tell me your name, age, and show me your cultivation level. Zai Xiang had a strict, all-business manner, so his voice was unfeeling and cold. Yan Tian Zhao, 15 years old. The young man looked a bit embarrassed. As for cultivation level, he stretched out his right hand and hung. A green-colored, dazzling light flashed, forming an intricate pattern underneath his palm. This. Everyone stood up in a flash. This was martial intent. The spiritual ocean tier. Phut, phut, phut. Gods, there's another spiritual ocean tier elite, and he's only 15 years old. Fuck. I had thought that it was enough of a miracle for a 24-year-old in the spiritual ocean tier to exist. At least, there had never appeared one in the last 300 years in Rain Country. Who knew that my shock hadn't even passed, when there appeared a 15-year-old in the spiritual ocean tier. From the looks of this young man, he's definitely not 20 years old yet. Even if he is 20 years old, it is unbelievable enough for him to be in the spiritual ocean tier at that age. Is this also a citizen of Rain Country? Yan Tian Zhao. Does anyone know which clan this genius comes from? Not just the crowd had dropped their jaws in shock. Even the Rain Emperor had slightly straightened and sat up straight on his throne. There was actually such a genius of martial arts in Rain Country. The envoys from the other 8 nations were similarly dumbstruck and felt incredible dread at the same time. This generation of Rain Country was really a bit too awesome, weren't they? In alchemy, there was a 17-year-old big boss, and in martial arts, there were 2 spiritual ocean tier elites. Did this mean that Rain Country would leave them all behind in their dust and dominate over the other 8 nations? Yan Tian Zhao turned over and passed his eyes over Ling Han and Feng Yan. The childishness and bashfulness on his face disappeared without a trace, and he released an aura that only belonged to a powerful elite, domineering and evil. Feng Yan instantly looked serious. He was proud, but he was not foolish. Even if Yan Tian Zhao had just broken through to the spiritual ocean tier, he had no advantage at all in terms of cultivation level. Moreover, Yan Tian Zhao was only 15. A 15-year-old in the spiritual ocean tier. He'd never heard of someone like that, and never even dared to think that such a person could really exist. Meanwhile, Ling Han sighed internally. Indeed, here appeared another monster by his side. In comparison with the Azura Demon Emperor, Yan Tian Zhao was no longer important enough for him to take seriously. Rong Huan Xian was the real person he would dread facing now. Very quickly, Yan Tian Zhao's information was found out was the only son of Lady Yan of the Cherishing Flower Pavilion, and had once been in a 10-year-long coma. A young man who had been in a coma for 10 years, yet instantly broke through to the spiritual ocean tier upon his awakening. Fuck, I want to sleep like this for 10 years too. There was definitely going to be a good show today. At first, it was Feng Yan who was the only outstanding person, and now it has become a fierce battle between 2 equally powerful contenders. Ling Han smiled without a word. There was still himself and Hunyo to be considered too. Chapter 272. Chapter 272. Nyo built this road. At first, when Feng Yan appeared as a spiritual ocean tier elite, he was like an unrivaled god of war, and the one and only champion that was capable to suppressing all those around him until they paled in comparison. Though Ling Han was also a glorious and bright existence, yet that was because of his achievements in alchemy. His cultivation level of the first layer of the gushing spring tier was completely unremarkable among the younger generation of Rain Country. But the moment Yan Tian Zhao appeared, all of Feng Yan's limelight was immediately snatched away. A 15-year-old in the spiritual ocean tier was even more astonishing. But that was a good thing too. What was the point of having a one-man show? It would be even more exciting if there was vigorous competition. Feng Yan stared at Yan Tian Zhao. He felt slightly troubled. That was because he both had to prevent Yan Tian Zhao from being the first person to reach the peak and cripple Ling Han's legs at the same time. All of a sudden, the difficulty level had sharply increased. Yan Tian Zhao stood at one side, an evil smile curling about the corners of his lips. His expression was completely unlike a young man who was only 15 years old. Lu Yutong was dumbstruck. She had personally witnessed that bashful and delicate Yan Tian Zhao. She never thought that this young man would be able to achieve the spiritual ocean tier in a short few months' time. Moreover, that evil aura was enough to cause her hair to stand on end. Everyone was making the final preparations, waiting for the tournament to begin. After another half an hour had passed, the Rain Emperor nodded and declared, "Get ready to start." Xia Chong stood up and said, "The registration period is now over. The rules for the competition are as follows. There is to be no use of spirit tools or alchemical pills. You must not use any spirit talismans or decrees as well. In short, you may only make use of your own personal ability. Technically, you are not supposed to wound anyone. However, weapons are blind, so even if anything does happen, it would be unavoidable. If you do not want to get injured, you still have the time to withdraw now. Is there anyone who is unclear about anything? Immediately raise your questions now. When he finished his words, no one said anything. Then, when I count to 3, all of you are to set off at the same time. 1, 2, 3. The third count was just heard, and shio, 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 shio. All of the participants rushed forwards. Over 100 people surrounded the foot of the hill. As there were a total of 32 paths from the very start, they naturally had to avoid any powerful opponents as much as possible. Moreover, every path was exceptionally narrow and would only allow one person to pass. Thus, if one wanted to advance forwards, the only choice he had was to first remove the person in front of him. For this short while, they were like thirsty horses fighting over a drink of water from a spring, and it was a fierce scene. Shio, they only saw a tiny figure race forwards and become the first to rush to the foot of the hill at a speed that was enough to leave them dumbfounded. The figure directly left behind the runner-up about half the distance and began to ascend the hill. It was Hunyo. Pooh! Everyone choked, 10,000 curses flashing past in their heads. When Feng Yan appeared on the scene as a spiritual ocean tier elite, they were all extremely shocked, thinking that it was certain Feng Yan would get the first place. When Yan Tian Zhao similarly appeared as a spiritual ocean tier elite, they all judged that the first place would most likely be a competition between Feng Yan and Yan Tian Zhao alone. But when the competition began, and there was absolutely no doubt, they all thought that an unforeseen accident had happened. A little girl that everyone had thought was just playing around had actually rushed forwards at a speed that they could only admire. She was so fast they didn't even get the chance to stop her. No wonder the Rain Emperor allowed Hunyo to participate. The little girl had to be in the gushing spring tier. Damn a 5 or 6-year-old in the gushing spring tier. Everyone was so astonished their facial muscles were twitching uncontrollably. What kind of concept was that? At 5 or 6 years old, the majority of people were probably still playing with mud, weren't they? Ordinarily speaking, awakening the spirit base would usually happen after 10 years old, but this little girl was astonishingly already in the gushing spring tier. Moreover, her speed was so fast that even Feng Yan and Yan Tian Zhao could only watch as she raced past them. The envoys from the 8 nations all exchanged looks, and they all saw that the mouths of the others were gaping wide enough to accommodate 3 eggs. Was Rain Country specialized in producing monsters? Feng Yan and Yan Tian Zhao both made a move. One shot out a silver blade, while the other threw out a green-colored dense smoke. However, neither attack was able to catch up to Hunyo. When everyone else reached the foot of the hill, Hunyo had already reached the peak. Fuck! What's the point of continuing to race then? They hadn't even started competing, and the tournament's already over. Wahahaha! Hunyo suddenly stopped, turned around, and placed her arms at her waist. Her ferocious nature was fully on display, and she announced loudly, "Nyo built this road. Aside from Ling Han, no one else can pass." Pooh! Everyone once again choked. However, this time was not because of shock, but due to laughing. Feng Yan and the others were slightly stunned before hurriedly breaking out into a run. Since Hunyo had no plans to become the first person to reach the peak and was leaving this chance to Ling Han, then there was no need for them to be reserved, was there? The others all fought to enter the 32 paths and began the first round of battle. Pung, pung, pung. Everyone moved, intending to become the first to ascend the hill. They would thus have to deal with the person in front of them. Each path was like a single log bridge that could not accommodate more than one person. In mere moments, there were immediately a few dozen people who had been forfeited as their bodies were flung away. there were only 32 people left who continued to advance. However, the single log bridge very soon joined with another, and 32 paths became 16 paths. Another 16 people were mercilessly forfeited. They were flung away, and their bodies fell down from the air. The next was for 8 competitors to emerge from the remaining 16. There were only 8 people left. Aside from Feng Yan and Yan Tianzhao, these two who were considered to be the popular candidates for the champion, there was also Ling Han, Zhao Huan, Qin Liu Tong, Huang Zitao, and Qian Wuyong. The third imperial prince did not participate because of his position. The eldest imperial prince did not participate either, as he was past the age restriction. Ling Han actually managed to pass as well. This caused quite a number of people to be confused. Wasn't this guy only in the first layer of the gushing spring tier? Setting aside the fact that he was not able to rival Feng Yan and Yan Tianzhao in the gushing spring tier, he would also be considered the weakest. So how was he so powerful? After all, there were not many who had actually witnessed Feng Yan and Ling Han exchange blows at the Lu residence that day. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been so shocked. Ling Han was also a powerful opponent, all right. Feng Yan and Yan Tianzhao were very coordinated. They both occupied one side, so they would only encounter each other in the finals when 2 paths joined into one. This would help them avoid encountering each other beforehand, which may lead to them both being forfeited. Feng Yan's next opponent was Huang Zitao, and unsurprisingly, he flung Huang Zitao out of the competition with a single blow and entered into the 4th path. Yan Tianzhao's opponent was Liu Yutong. He only gave a light wave of his hand and said, "Apologies, big sister Yutong," and he had forced Liu Yutong downhill. Qin faced Qian Wuyong. With a single wave of his saber, 5 flashes of saber qi danced wildly. Qian Wuyong only gave a muffled humph. A splatter of blood gushed from his chest, and he was also forced downhill. Lastly, it was Ling Han against Zhao Huan. Zhao Huan was one of the 3 core disciples of Huyang Academy. Moreover, he was in the 2nd place, so he was even stronger than Qin Yi. According to rumors, when he was born, there was an unnatural phenomenon as golden light lit up half the imperial city. Putting aside whether or not this had really happened, the current Zhao Huan indeed had a terrifying aura. His eyes were as sharp as dragons, and he was filled with a dominating air. He laughed loudly and said, "Apologies, Grandmaster Ling." He delivered a punch, and his fist was covered in golden light, shooting towards Ling Han like it was an actual shooting star, planning to defeat Ling Han and take the 4th path. Maybe not. Ling Han similarly shot out a punch and charged towards Zhao Huan without any fancy moves. Pum! A loud bang was heard, and the whole hill shook before they saw Zhao Huan being flung away. So far! Someone gazed into the distance, and Zhao Huan had already become a small black in the far distance. Instantly, he was already 1,000 feet away. Ling Han managed to take the 4th path and the final position. Chapter 273. Chapter 273. Who is the strongest of the younger generation? Now, there were only a few paths left when 4 paths joined to become 2, and 2 paths joined to become 1. Technically, that would mean one only had to defeat 2 more people to reach the peak. Of course, there was a Hunyou who did not like playing by the rules who was currently standing by at a higher spot, waiting to attack. However, speed did not represent battle prowess. Once embroiled in a close quarters combat, the advantage of superior speed would be greatly decreased. Out of the 5 of them, who would be the last one standing? On the next path, Yan Tianzhao versus Qin Yi, and Feng Yan versus Ling Han. Go! Yan Tianzhao moved. With a flick of his sleeve, shio, 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 7 battle spears shot out. These spears were formed from origin power and were entirely black in color. There were patterns engraved on the bodies of these spears, formed from his martial intent. Qin Yi dared not be careless. There was a gap of an entire tier between them, and this was a gap that could mean he would be completely dominated by his opponent. He brandished his saber in a slash and displayed his full ability without holding anything back. As the saber flashed, 5 flashes of saber chi shone brilliantly. To be honest, 5 flashes of saber chi was extremely impressive. Before Ling Han had delved into discussions about the art of the sword with Mo Gao, he had also only formed 5 flashes of sword chi, and this was still based on the comprehension about martial arts that he had retained from his last life. However, the spiritual ocean tier was much too powerful. Moreover, Yan Tianzhao was obviously a genius whose battle prowess exceeded his cultivation level. Can you put all his effort into it, and ding, 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 somehow managed to shatter 3 battle spears. But there were still 4 remaining that, no matter how much he tried, he could not get rid of. Pu. He was instantly pierced through by 4 battle spears, and the force of the attack flung him away. Thankfully, Yan Tianzhao obviously took care in how much power he put into his attack. These 4 spears pierced respectively into his shoulders and legs, yet managed to miss his vital spots. Otherwise, the Rain Emperor was sitting at the peak, and if he made a move, that would signify a dramatic change of events. The 4 battle spears contained Yan Tianzhao's martial intent. As a result, though the battle spears would disappear once they entered one's body, since they were formed from origin power, the martial intent contained in them would still subdue Qin. Qin was not able to move one bit, and with a pung, he fell heavily onto the ground. Hum! A figure shot out and picked up Qin. It was Lian Guangzhu. When he saw Ling Han, Feng Yan, and Yan Tianzhao, who were nearing the peak, there was a complicated expression in his eyes. Yet, he merely gave a sigh, withdrew his gaze, and began to treat Qin's injuries. Qin's body trembled slightly, and his one hand was tightly gripped into a fist. He had even bitten so hard onto his lip that it had began bleeding. Don't be despondent. It is no humiliation to lose at the hands of a spiritual ocean tier elite. Lian Guangzhu comforted his only disciple. Qin did not cheer up because of this. Instead, he looked towards Ling Han and said, "He is stronger than me." Near to the peak, Ling Han was currently engaged in a fierce battle with Feng Yan. "Ha ha ha, are you prepared?" Feng Yan smirked. "Now I am in the spiritual ocean tier, so how do you plan to block me?" He punched out a fist hung. 9 long sabers appeared and shot towards Ling Han together with his fist. These 9 long sabers were naturally formed from origin power. The martial intent contained in them became intricate patterns that shone on the bodies of these sabers, and it was as if they were like divine sabers. Ling Han laughed loudly. He waved his sword in a slash and used the 4 seasons sword technique. Every move had 4 styles: winter, summer, autumn, and spring. For images circulated, forming an unbroken sword intent, possessing formidable power. Pung, 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 pung. The 9 long sabers were instantly shattered, and Ling Han's 4 seasons sword technique also disappeared at the same time. The scene that Qin saw was precisely this one, and this was something he could not accept. Not too long ago, he was still capable of ripping Ling Han in half with a single wave of his saber. Ling Han had only managed to escape that fate through a trick. But just how much time had passed since then? Now Ling Han was able to disperse the attack of a spiritual ocean tier opponent, whereas he himself was defeated with a single strike. The gap between the 2 of them was indescribably wide. These 3 are the real monsters. You do not have to follow them. Just go at your own pace, Lian Guangzhu advised. At the same time, he really felt that it was a great pity, as he had once wanted to take Ling Han as his disciple. However, because Feng Yan's matter had quickly happened after that, he was completely pushed onto the side opposing Ling Han. No one knew that Lian Guangzhu had once stayed at the Winter Moon sect, and had even received guidance from a powerful elite of the sect, which was how he managed to attain his current level of achievement. And that powerful elite was precisely Feng Yan's master. Thus, Lian Guangzhu would try his best to fulfill Feng Yan's requests to return the favor. However, a stronger battle spirit flashed through Kenya's eyes. He was definitely not going to admit defeat. He wanted to walk to the ultimate point of this path of the saber. In Rain Country, he could only achieve a limited amount, so he wanted to step out of this country and into the wider world to refine and polish his saber arts. He would either become a Grandmaster saber wielder or die on this path. Feng Yan's first attack did not succeed, and he was just about to attack again. But then he saw that Yan Tian Zhao had defeated his opponent and continued his way up the hill. As a result, he could only set Ling Han aside for the moment and race towards Yan Tian Zhao. His fist shot out, and once again 9 battle sabers attacked. Yan Tian Zhao did not dare to underestimate Feng Yan's attack. Thus, he could only turn back around, flick his sleeve, and similarly shoot out 9 battle spears. Pung, pung, pung. The battle spears clashed with the battle sabers, and they were both shattered at the same time. Taking advantage of this opening, Feng Yan charged forwards and stopped Yan Tian Zhao from continuing to advance anyways. Hunyo could be disregarded. If she had really wanted to get the first place, they probably should have just given up and gone home. With a sharp whistle, Ling Han too charged into the battle with sword in hand. Hong, hong, hong. It was a battle royale between the 3 of them. These 3 young men were all the type to do things their own way. There wasn't any chance for any 2 of them to join forces against the 3rd. Thus, each attack they delivered was aimed towards the other 2, which made for an incredibly chaotic scene. Yan Tian Zhao and Feng Yan were both in the spiritual ocean tier. Every attack they delivered would have martial intent circulating around, and possess incredibly shocking power. However, Ling Han, who was obviously in the first layer of the gushing spring tier, was only a slight bit weaker than the 2 of them. Thus, neither Feng Yan nor Yan Tian Zhao dared to underestimate him. This was dumbfounding to the spectators, as they all felt as if their view of the world was crumbling. After a 24-year-old in the spiritual ocean tier elite appeared, another spiritual ocean tier elite who was only 15 years old appeared. Then came a 5 or 6-year-old in the gushing spring tier, which once again attacked their weak hearts. Then this 5 or 6-year-old gushing spring tier martial artist exploded with a speed that struck even those in the spiritual ocean tier dumb. It almost made them die of shock. And now, great, here was another monster-like gushing spring tier martial artist who was able to stand against opponents of the spiritual ocean tier when he himself was only at the first layer of the gushing spring tier. This was enough to make them feel as if they were dreaming. Was this still that world of martial arts they knew? Pung, 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 pung. The 3 of them were embroiled in a furious battle, and as they simultaneously impeded each other, it was difficult to decide who would be the victor for the moment. In terms of current battle prowess, Yan Tian Zhao should be the strongest, because his cultivation level was highest as he had reached the 3rd layer of the spiritual ocean tier. The second would be Feng Yan, who was at the 1st layer of the spiritual ocean tier, and last would be Ling Han. On the surface, he looked to be in the 1st layer of the gushing spring tier, but was actually at the 8th layer of the gushing spring tier, and his real battle prowess actually very closely approached the spiritual ocean tier. But because if one was slightly stronger, he would naturally be on the receiving end of fierce attacks from the other 2, and thus was unable to get the upper hand, which was what forced this battle into a deadlock. However, it was also possible that the fragile balance would be instantly destroyed, because as of this moment, the 3 fighters had still not displayed their strongest battle prowess. If any one of them suddenly exploded and delivered an extremely powerful attack, it might be possible that he would be able to fling the other 2 fighters away and emerge victorious. With this one move, the winner would be the first person who managed to appear in front of the Rain Emperor. But since things have developed this way, the plans of the 3 have changed. They would defeat the other 2 and become the champion. They were all proud young men, and faced with a powerful opponent, their first thought would be to defeat him and not retreat or avoid him. Otherwise, if they had lost their invincibility, then what difference did they have with any other ordinary genius? Feng Yan was the first to reveal his trump card as there appeared flashes of silver light on his body. He had activated his special physical constitution of mirror light body. Chapter 274. Chapter 274. Wild Strength, Berserk, Ape Bloodline. The moment he activated mirror light body, Feng Yan's battle prowess soared. He would suffer 20% less damage and could even reflect 20% of attack power onto his opponents. This was an extremely scary thing. Moreover, the more attacks he suffered, the greater the effects of mirror light body. After only a few moves, Ling Han and Yen Tian Zhao had ceased their mutual attacks on each other and had practically combined their forces against Feng Yan. Feng Yan instantly laughed loudly. Though the pressure he was experiencing had greatly increased due to being attacked by two young, powerful elites at the same time, the fact that he could stand against them on his own gave him a powerful feeling of achievement. The battle today did not only include a personal vendetta or the mystical power. It also involved the competition for the strongest amongst the younger generation of Rain Country, or perhaps even the whole 9 nations of the desolate north. They could not help but fight. Yen Tian Zhao gave a humph, and a green 6-pointed star flashed in his eyes. Suddenly, his battle prowess spiked, and he was able to instantly turn the disadvantageous situation around, now capable of standing against Feng Yan on his own. The 3 of them were embroiled in a battle royale, but because of Yen Tian Zhao's sudden increase in prowess, he instantly attracted the majority of Feng Yan's attacks, so it had practically become a furious battle between himself and Feng Yan. The pressure on Ling Han decreased. Neither Feng Yan nor Yen Tian Zhao had really taken Ling Han seriously. No matter how you looked at it, Ling Han was only in the gushing spring tier. Since he had not yet even stepped into the spiritual ocean tier, how could they possibly think of him as a real opponent for them? Underestimating him? They would have to pay a price for that. Ling Han retreated a few steps and began to accumulate his power. The mysterious 3,000 was waiting to be used after he had accumulated enough power. This sword technique was extremely powerful and required a certain amount of time to gather enough power for it, but that would only be the time for 1 or 2 breaths. Immediately, an imposing aura exuded from Ling Han, and the might lying underneath was shockingly terrifying. Feng Yan and Yen Tian Zhao, who had been engaged in a fierce battle, immediately ceased all movement and turned to stare at Ling Han. They were shocked by the sword intent emanating from Ling Han. When this slash was delivered, it would definitely be a devastating, earth-shattering attack. Ling Han drew his sword, and instantly, after images of swords appeared in the sky illustriously, heading towards Feng Yan and Yen Tian Zhao as a monstrous wave. Feng Yan's expression changed abruptly. The power behind this slash was stronger by an unknown number of times than the 4 Seasons sword technique. He had originally thought that the 4 Seasons sword technique was Ling Han's ace in the hole and his final trump card, but had never thought that Ling Han could show an even more powerful sword technique. This was completely unbelievable to him. The sword rose, and it seemed as if winds and clouds were birthed with it. Feng Yan quickly roared loudly. This slash was too powerful. He wouldn't be able to receive this move if he merely relied on the mirror light body. So he had to use his strongest trump card. As he roared tumultuously, his body actually expanded, as if it was pumped full of air. The inconceivable thing was that black-colored fur actually grew rapidly on his body, as if he had become an ape. However, his aura also soared correspondingly, increasing all the way from the first layer of the spiritual ocean tier. The middle period of the first layer, the late period, the peak period, and without the slightest bit of stagnation, he breached over and directly entered the second layer of the spiritual ocean tier. It was still increasing. The second layer of the spiritual ocean tier, the third layer, and finally stopped at the 4th layer of the spiritual ocean tier. He once again shot out a fist, and like previously 9 battle sabers shot out with his fist. but they were far more profound than they had been, and the martial intent contained in them was much more powerful as well. On the other side, Yan Tianzhao's eyes had also narrowed, and a green fog gushed out from all over his body, forming a shield-like object in front of him, and he was protected behind it. Xiao, xiao, xiao! The sword images shot forward, and it was indeed an earth-shattering attack. On the peak, the Rain Emperor had also stood up. His face that had been formerly calm was now wearing a shocked expression. It was obvious that the might behind Ling Han's move had exceeded even his expectations. The swords reached their target. Hong, 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 hong. Thunderous bangs were heard, and one after another, streams of light crashed into one another, and shattered, putting on an endless luster. All those at the foot of the hill were watching dizzily with wide eyes. These few young men were obviously merely in the early stage of the spiritual ocean tier, yet they displayed battle prowess that should belong to the middle stage or even late stage of the spiritual ocean tier. No, there was even a guy that was only in the first layer of the gushing spring tier. This was too much asterisk nonsense. Did that mean that the ranks in martial arts were only for show? After this one move, Ling Han, Feng Yan, and Yan Tianzhao separated, with a certain distance between each other. For the moment, none of them made a move, and merely stood opposite one another. I really can't underestimate you, Feng Yan said solemnly. However, his whole body was covered with black fur, and all his muscles were swelling. So he had completely transformed into a muscular guy, and there wasn't any hint left of his original appearance. It was like a giant ape had suddenly crashed the show and ruined the image completely. However, now that you have forced me to use my trump card, the two of you would only be qualified to be trampled under my feet, he laughed wildly. Ling Han frowned slightly and said, Wild Strength Berserk, Ape Bloodline. He finally understood why Feng Yan would be taken as disciple by a powerful elite of the spiritual infant tier from the Winter Moon. Sect Wild Strength Berserk Ape was an ancient demonic beast, and it was rumored that these demonic beasts were in the Shattering Void tier. Moreover, they were an extremely powerful race even in the Shattering Void tier. Since he had inherited this kind of bloodline, Feng Yan could also possibly break through to Shattering Void tier. Who would be able to resist the temptation of having a disciple in the Shattering Void tier? The stronger one's ability, the more powerful their desire. Since they themselves could not possibly break through to the Shattering Void tier in this lifetime, then having a disciple that would similarly bring to them a powerful satisfaction and sense of accomplishment. Feng Yan could not help but tense up and said, You even know about Wild Strength Berserk Ape? Actually, in the past, he himself had no idea what kind of bloodline he possessed. It was only by coincidence that it was discovered by that powerful elite from the Winter Moon sect, who recognized this bloodline. Yet Ling Han actually managed to recognize it with a single look. This guy was really too knowledgeable, wasn't he? Ling Han smiled calmly and said, So what if it is Wild Strength Berserk Ape? Your bloodline is extremely thin at the moment and can only increase your cultivation level by 3 layers, so it's nothing to worry about. Then, I'll just have to let you see how much I am nothing to worry about. Feng Yan was flung into a furious rage. The hatred he felt for Ling Han, who had killed his brother, burned powerfully in his heart, and as he had activated the bloodline of a demonic beast, his temperament was also greatly affected. He had become incredibly brusque and violent, and instantly charged toward Ling Han. See one Tsang, his 10 fingers separated and transformed into sharp claws that were like the blades of knives. Feng Yan waved his hands repeatedly, and his claws tore through the air, actually forming multiple blades made of air. Xiao, 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 xiao. They flew towards Ling Han first, whereas Feng Yan himself followed closely behind. His whole body was exuding a shockingly violent air, as if he himself was an ancient demonic beast that had been brought back to life. Ling Han frowned slightly. The bloodline of an ancient demonic beast was indeed a headache. He humphed. He was not able to use the mysterious 3,000 as he did not have the time to, so he merely waved his sword and used the 4 seasons sword technique. Instantly, the images of spring, summer, autumn, and winter were displayed, making one feel as if they were able to experience the change of seasons all in a single instant. Pu, 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 pu. The blades of air shot out, and the sword move of the 4 seasons sword technique paused. Feng Yen took the chance to charge over and shot out a fist. 9 battle sabers appeared and ruthlessly headed towards Ling Han's chest. Ling Han used the shadow wind technique and rapidly retreated. Peng! However, he still experienced a bit of suffering as his whole body was flung 30 feet away. A bit of blood seeped out of the corner of his lips. Even if he had now formed body of rock cliff, he was still not able to completely resist Feng Yan's attack. After all, the power of an elite in the 4th layer of the spiritual ocean tier added together with the bloodline of the wild strength berserk ape totaled up to a much too powerful attack prowess. Feng Yan laughed in his arrogance and said, in ancient days, the wild strength berserk ape was practically invincible. Their claws brought their own rules of the world, and were able to tear through all defenses. Ling Han, I'm definitely going to cripple both your legs today. Chapter 275. Chapter 275. An astonishing Hunyo. Yan Tian Zhao pressed down on his nose and muttered, So there's no more of my business? He shook his head and said, Forget it. Rain Country is only one of my stopovers. Once I have obtained the mystical power, I shall go to a more lively spot in the northern region for a look around. The overall level of martial arts in this place is really too low, and there are only these few geniuses, so it is not beneficial to my growth. He placed his hands behind his back and headed towards the peak of the hill. Nyo built this road, and no one is allowed to pass. Hunyo instantly stretched out her arms, looking like she was planning to stop him from passing. Little girl, you're a bit strange, but you are not yet strong enough to stand against me. Step aside, I don't want to hurt you, Yan Tian Zhao said calmly. It was unknown whether he had become merciful or was wary of Hunyo's strangeness. Aside from Ling Han, no one is allowed to pass. Hunyo snarled and took the initiative to attack. Xiao, she was as fast as a gust of wind, and quite many elites of the spiritual ocean tier could barely capture her movements. With a flash, the little girl had already appeared behind Yan Tianzhao. She raised her small hands high and schwa, launched a series of furious claw attacks. Tung, tung, tung. Yan Tianzhao suddenly stumbled back a few steps due to the attack, and there appeared multiple bloodstains on his back, which showed the terrifying destructive power Hunyo had in her hands. Once again, another person in the 1st layer of the gushing spring tier, and once more someone capable of wounding an opponent in the spiritual ocean tier. Those standing at the foot of the hill felt like they were living in a dream. This was really too surreal. When had the gushing spring tier become so awesome? And moreover, it was only the 1st layer of the gushing spring tier. Previously, they had all thought Hunyo was purely there to play cute, but had never thought that the tournament had just barely begun and the little girl would deliver such a great shock to them, bursting with an astonishing speed. However, speed was speed, but what about now? The 1st layer of the gushing spring tier could actually rip through the defenses of the spiritual ocean tier. This destructive power was practically terrifying. They once again turned to look at Feng Yan. According to hearsay, the destructive power of the wild strength berserk ape was frightening, but an attack on Ling Han only managed to cause a bit of blood to appear at the corner of his lips. However, Hunyo was capable of reducing Yan Tian Zhao's back to a lump of flesh and blood. Under such a comparison, it was obvious that it would be more accurate to say that Hunyo was the owner of the wild strength berserk ape bloodline. On one side, it was a spiritual ocean tier martial artist attacking a gushing spring tier opponent, whereas on the other side, it was a gushing spring tier martial artist attacking a spiritual ocean tier opponent. Yet it was Hunyo whose destructive power was stronger. So how could it be any more obvious? Xiao, Hunyo once again launched an attack. Speed was her greatest advantage as she moved like the wind. When one's eyes capture her figure, in actual fact, the little girl had appeared in another location, and what the eyes saw was actually only her afterimage. Hunyo had no sliver of mercy in her at all. Slaughter was her instinct, and now that her instincts had been activated, it was as if she had transformed into a little girl and endlessly pounced on Yen Tianzhao in attack. On his arms and legs, Yen Tianzhao continued to bleed endlessly. It was pointless even if he had the cultivation of the spiritual ocean tier, as he was completely unable to spot Hunyo, so there was absolutely no use for his superior cultivation. Everyone was flabbergasted. In their mindset, speed could only be used for the purpose of flight, but this scene in front of their eyes had turned over all their ideas. The reason why they would have this idea was because their speed had not reached an extreme level. Whoever had speed like what Hunyo possessed was completely able to turn speed into the greatest source of their battle prowess. Yen Tianzhao's expression became darker and darker, but there was still an incredibly evil smile curling up the corners of his lips. He actually sprayed out a green fog all over his body that transformed into the multiple threads that wove together tightly and transformed the area within 30 feet of him into a spiderweb-like area. It was not a net that had been laid flat, but a net that stood upright. Hunyo instantly crashed into the green net. She struggled, but discovered that though the green threads were extremely thin, they were shockingly sturdy, so no matter how much effort she used, she was unable to struggle free. In my heaven and earth spiderweb, you still plan on getting free? Yen Tianzhao smirked coldly. These threads moved, and it was as if they had a life and will of their own, sending Hunyo closer and closer to Yen Tianzhao. Hunyo became anxious, turned her head, opened her mouth, and bit. Woo-la! And a green thread actually was ripped in half by her bite. Pooh! Yen Tianzhao was so shocked his eyeballs were about to pop out of his head. This was heaven and earth spiderweb, his absolute trump card. As long as someone that was of the same cultivation level as he was captured by his spiderweb, then it was impossible he would be able to get free. The sturdiness of it was comparable to ingredients of the same level that were used to forge weapons. Yet this little girl actually tore through it with a bite. What kind of asterisk teeth did she have? When he recalled how he had suffered so many claw attacks at Hunyo's hands, then if the little girl coincidentally decided to bite him instead, Yen Tianzhao could not help but swallow and reach out to rub his throat. Then it was really possible that she could tear through his throat in a single bite, and he would die instantly. He could not help but feel a powerful lingering feat, and the killing intent in his eyes grew exponentially. He delivered a palm strike to Hunyo's chest. Hung! The Rain Emperor gave a light humph, and his imperial authority spread out, broad and powerful. Yen Tianzhao instantly experienced a pain in his chest, and his consciousness shivered. He hurriedly withdrew some portion of his power, and with a pung, Hunyo was flung away by the strike. With a paw, she had fallen at the foot of the hill, and her small figure lay unmoving on the ground. She had only suffered a heavy injury because that humph of the Rain Emperor made Yen Tianzhao withdraw a large portion of his power. The Rain Emperor had already said that this was a tournament and a spar, so it was unavoidable that there would be injuries. However, killing someone else was definitely not permitted. In front of the Rain Emperor, who would dare commit murder? Ling Han was currently engaged in a great battle with Feng Yan, and when he saw this scene, he could not help but fly into a powerful rage. Get lost! He waved out a powerful slash which contained an endless inferno of fury. Feng Yan actually dared not receive the strike head-on, and could not help but make a strategic retreat. With a sweep of his divine sense, Ling Han knew that Hunyo was not in any life-threatening danger. He also knew that with the Rain Emperor there, it was impossible that anyone would lose their life. But when he saw Hunyo's tiny figure lying there on the ground without any sign of movement and with a bit of blood on the corner of her lips, he was still extraordinarily enraged and felt an urge to destroy every bit of the heavens and earth. Hunyo had been injured because she had tried to stop Yen Tianzhao, and the reason why Hunyo had done so was naturally because of him. Since his rebirth, this was the second time he was so furious. The first time was when Ling Dongxing was captured by the Qing clan and was about to be beheaded in public. "Yen Tianzhao," he roared, shrugged off Feng Yan, and charged towards Yen Tianzhao. Yen Tianzhao was also very displeased. He, a genuine spiritual ocean tier elite, was actually beaten black and blue by a little girl. Now he had only knocked Hunyo unconscious and injured her slightly. So what was there for Ling Han to be so furious about? Feng Yan was even more enraged and screamed in fury, because Ling Han actually shrugged him off and ignored him. Moreover, this was the first time he had seen Ling Han so furious. Even when Lu Yutong was forced to marry another, Ling Han had not been so angered. This obviously meant that Ling Han had only been playing with him previously, and had not taken him seriously as an opponent at all. Damn it, he was really too despicable. Ling Han was enraged. Lu Yutong was merely his little female attendant, but he thought of Hunyo as his family. Moreover, Hunyo was only such a little girl, so she was naturally even more doted upon by Ling Han. Even he dared not reprimand her too harshly, yet now she was actually so heavily injured by Yen Tianzhao that she was lying on the ground, unmoving. How could this not cause him to be extraordinarily furious? He drew his sword in rage, and at that one moment he had forgotten everything else, and the only thought in his head was to behead Yen Tianzhao. Shua, 7 flashes of sword qi shown. Chapter 276. Chapter 276. 7 flashes of sword qi. Reverie _. Under the fury, Ling Han finally broke through, forming the 7th flash of sword qi. Tongue, 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 everyone at the base of the hill stood up. No matter if it were saber qi or sword qi, as long as one produced qi, one would have the potential to become a king. However, up to 3 flashes was just a minor accomplishment, and 6 flashes counted as major accomplishment, but 7 flashes could truly be crowned king. To observe Rain Country's history, those who possessed 6 flashes of qi were not little, though all of them were 60 or 70 before reaching it. At least, geniuses like that still existed. But 7 flashes, one and only. Surveying the entire 9 nations of the desolate north, 700 years ago, a genius blade user certainly appeared and materialized 7 flashes of sword qi, being invincible at the spiritual pedestal, tear not shaming the state of king. However, when this blade sect master formed 7 flashes of sword qi, he or she was already at a high age of 62 years old. How old was this youngster before their eyes? A freak. The freaks today were appearing endlessly. The 7th flash of sword qi wasn't all of Ling Han's breakthrough. Under his violent rage, Ling Han unleashed mysterious 3,000. This was his strongest sword skill as usual. But what wasn't usual was that under the violent rage, each flash of sword qi transformed. Mysterious 3,000 could instantly unleash 3,000 attacks at one's extreme. This was definitely an ultimate move, and at the highest tier, it could almost take over the world. However, Ling Han was far from such a tier, so he could only unleash 100 attacks. Now, 800 sword lights appeared. Could his comprehension of mysterious 3,000 have advanced so much under his rage? The strange thing was that he still unleashed 100 sword lights. That was because the 7 flashes of sword qi split from 1 into 2, and from 2 into 3, with each flash of sword qi turning into 100 sword lights. 800 sword lights radiated through heaven and earth. What sort of concept was this? It was equivalent to 800 Ling Hans attacking, and each one unleashing an attack. Although this attack was a normal one, without using any techniques, but it was a full-force attack. 800 together could scare someone to death. Behind, Feng Yan stopped abruptly. This radiant and resplendent attack scared even him, making him unwilling to parry that attack. That would truly be walking himself into trouble. Yan Tianzhao's expression changed drastically. He hurriedly roared, and waves of green mist were ejected, turning into a barrier that blocked the area between him and Ling Han. 800 sword lights struck. Pung! The green barrier immediately turned into infinite pieces, and the sword light continued on its path, sending Yan Tianzhao flying through the sky in a parabolic arc before landing heavily onto the ground. He was still alive, but his body was covered in blood. His body was torn so much that bones were revealed and organs could be seen in his thoracic cavity. The surprising thing was that the muscles in his entire body were wriggling, healing at a surprisingly fast speed. Ling Han was shocked. This still couldn't kill him. It was no wonder Rain Emperor didn't intervene. He sat onto the ground. 800 sword lights had been shockingly powerful, but the expenditure was also terrifyingly large, extracting his origin power completely. This was only 800 sword lights, which wasn't the limit of 3,000. It was no wonder that he couldn't activate the 3 styles of black origins. Second form and third form didn't even have the origin power. Heaven's sword sex people were all abnormal. Ling Han panted heavily. Hunyo was in a coma. Yan Tianzhao was in a coma. Only Feng Yang's battle prowess was whole. Ha 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 ha. Feng Yan laughed aloud, walking over in large strides. Who would have thought that I'd win in this way? He already restrained his wild, strength, berserk ape bloodline, which was greatly exhausting, so he naturally restrained his mirror light body as well. Now the other 3 already lost their battle prowess. Even if his cultivation was weakened by 100 times, he would still win. Ling Han smiled bitterly. He didn't think much under a violent rage, and he didn't know he could acquire a breakthrough on the application of mysterious 3,000, unleashing 800 sword lights at once and draining his origin power completely. Medicinal pills couldn't be taken during the match. Taking a pill meant forfeiting, so what should he do? Watch helplessly as Feng Yan reached the top. You truly disappoint me. I had thought to defeat you when you unleashed your full battle prowess, then cripple your 2 legs, striking you from the pinnacle of your life to an all-time low. Feng Yan said with a disappointed tone. Ling Han laughed aloud and said in disdain, My sword strike just now, would you dare to parry it? Feng Yan's expression stiffened. Even if he had 2 physiques which were both kick-ass, he was still scared by those radiant and extreme 800 sword lights. He supposed it could be blocked, but he would end up the same as Yan Tianzhao, being heavily injured. Humph. The result now is that you can only look up at me. He didn't respond to question, as such postulations had no meaning. Feng Yan revealed a cold expression, raising his foot to trample on Ling Han. He was going to make Ling Han lose face in front of the whole world. Ling Han reached out to block, but everyone could see how futile that was. Was a quasi-earth grade alchemy master that formed 7 flashes of sword chi actually going to receive such great humiliation? The people on the bottom felt unpleasant inside. Liu Tong and Li Sichong were even more agitated that they could not forfeit for Ling Han. Feng Yan sneered, stepping down without hesitation. His left foot stepped onto Ling Han's right hand, and a strong force, like a lofty mountain, pushed down on it, trampling down towards Ling Han's face. However, at this moment, Feng Yan's expression changed drastically as he let out a tragic scream that shook heaven and earth. What the hell was he screaming for? He clearly had a huge advantage, yet he still wanted to trick people. No. Everyone saw clearly that Feng Yan's left leg was eroding, as if it was made of mist dispersing from a puff. What was going on? Ling Han revealed a proud smile. He refined Azura Demon Emperor's demonic chi and formed a black-colored demonic seal on his palm afterwards. This was the power of regulation, extremely scary. Although the power was strong, it could only adhere to the palm surface, so normally it had almost no use. However, Feng Yan actually stepped on him, seeking pain for himself. Ah! Feng Yan cried out sharply, cutting off his own left leg. Otherwise, the erosion would continue to spread until his entire person was turned into dust. Pa! He abruptly sat onto the ground. The problem wasn't just a leg, but also a terrifying wave of power that penetrated inside his body, roiling and making him extremely unwell. Even enduring the urge to scream was already extremely difficult, let alone fighting. Now, of the four of them, none were still standing. Who would have thought that the scene would play out in this way? Everyone stared blankly, absolutely unable to accept what happened. Xiao! 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 Those who originally were knocked down the mountain came running back one after another. The formidable ones were hurt, and the ones unconscious lay unconscious. Was it not precisely their chance? Ling Han stood up. He wasn't hurt, just drained of origin power. Now he naturally recovered a little, and was able to stand and run without any problem at all. He took large strides, and was already before the Rain Emperor. The victor of this time's battle is Ling Han. Rain Emperor, imposing, filled voice sounded, shaking the skies.